The first time I heard his orchestra, I already knew this would end badly. Not because I believed in fate, or curses, or the tragic temperament of artists, but because of the way my heart lurched before I had even seen his face. I was standing in the very last row of the Musikverein, half hidden behind a gilded pillar, my work badge still hanging crooked round my neck. My fingers smelled faintly of metal and machine oil, the perfume of my day. I was a piano technician, not a paying guest. I was supposed to be here only to check on a temperamental instrument in the rehearsal room, then quietly disappear. But the stage door attendant had shrugged and said, "If you're already inside, why not stay for the concert? Last row is free. Just don't get caught by the manager." So I stayed. The golden hall glowed like a jewelry box, every surface reflecting light, crystal chandeliers, golden balconies, polished brass of trumpets warming up below. People in silk and dark wool murmured in several languages: German, English, French, while I stood in my cheap black coat and tried not to be intimidated by the elegance. Then he walked onto the podium. I didn't recognize him at first. To me he was just another tall, dark figure in a perfectly cut black tailcoat. But the hall recognized him. Applause rose like a tide, warm and expectant. He bowed once, briefly, as if the ceremony were something to get through, not enjoy. Only when he lifted his head did I see his eyes. From this distance I couldn't see the color clearly, but I saw their steadiness. No smile, no charming twinkle to seduce the audience. Just focus. A thin pale scar cut across his right eyebrow, a small imperfection in an otherwise symmetrical, almost classical face. His hair was dark and slightly unruly, like he had run his hands through it too many times before coming on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, Maestro Adrian Weiss," someone announced. The applause grew louder. Adrian Weiss. So this was him. I'd heard his name all week in the corridors backstage. The new star conductor. The one who brought orchestras to near obsessive precision. "He hears everything," one violinist had whispered with both fear and admiration. "Everything. Even your thoughts, I think." Another had rolled his eyes and added, "He also doesn't date. Not anymore. Not anymore." Back then, the phrase had slid past me. Just gossip drifting down a hallway. Now, as he raised his baton, I felt it hook into something invisible between my ribs. The first note exploded out of the orchestra like a held breath finally exhaled. The strings surged, the woodwinds wove around them, and the brass entered with the kind of terrifying, disciplined power that makes your throat tighten. The hall vibrated. I could feel the sound in the soles of my boots, in the stale coffee still sitting in my stomach, in the tired muscles of my hands. I had spent all afternoon crouched beside a grand piano in the rehearsal room, my hair full of dust, my knees aching on the wooden floor. The pianist had complained about the middle register being dull, lifeless, like someone smoking in the next room. I'd smiled politely, made minute adjustments, coaxed resonance out of metal and wood. That was my world. Screws, strings, felt hammers, microscopic changes no audience ever noticed. This what Adrian was doing was something else. The music didn't just fill the hall, it pulled the air into shapes. He didn't move much. His gestures were precise, economical, but every small movement meant something. A lift of his left hand softened the violins. A tiny twist of his wrist darkened the horns. He wasn't merely conducting. He was negotiating, demanding, pleading with 100 people at once, and somehow winning every argument. I forgot to breathe. Somewhere after the first movement, I realized my hands were trembling. I gripped the railing in front of me, the cold metal grounding me back in my body. What was this? Awe, envy. I'd spent my whole life listening to other people's music, repairing other people's instruments, making sure everyone else could shine under the lights. I had chosen that. I told myself. It was safer in the dark. But as I watched him, a tiny part of me whispered, what if I had been braver? The second movement began, quiet as confession. For the first time, his face changed. A muscle jumped near his jaw. His eyes lowered, as if remembering something or someone. The strings played a melody so fragile it felt like walking barefoot on ice. In that moment, I knew this piece wasn't just music to him. It was a story, and I was late to it. Something hot and ridiculous bloomed in my chest. I didn't even know this man. He didn't know I existed. I was just a woman hiding in the back row, clinging to a railing. And yet watching him, I felt like a stranger reading a love letter not addressed to her. You're being dramatic. I scolded myself. You're tired. You're hungry. That's all. But the lie sat clumsily on my tongue. The concert passed like a dream that hurt to wake up from. The final chord crashed. Silence followed. Thick and charged. Before the hall erupted into applause. People leapt to their feet. Brava! Bravo! Someone whistled from the front row. Flowers appeared, thrown onto the stage, white lilies, red roses, a cascade of colors at his feet. Adrian bowed once, twice. He smiled, finally, but it was a small, polite thing, directed more at the music stands than at the faces beyond them. Then, as the clapping went on and on, I saw him do something strange. He looked up, not in my direction, beyond me, through me. His gaze swept the balconies, the golden tiers, the shadowed corners of the hall. It moved quickly, almost urgently, like someone searching for a specific silhouette in a sea of strangers. For a heartbeat, I foolishly thought he might be looking for me. Then he looked past my row, higher, to the very top where the cheap seats were. His shoulders, visible even from this distance, tightened in disappointment. Whoever he was looking for, they were not here. The applause faded, replaced by the shuffling of coats and chatter. People began to leave, wrapping themselves back in their own lives. My feet had gone numb from standing, but I remained still, watching as Adrian disappeared backstage. I should have gone home then. I should have taken the tram back to my tiny room in the shared apartment on the edge of the city, heated leftover soup, and gone to bed grateful for free music. Instead, I stayed. I waited until most of the audience was gone, then slipped out through the side door that led to the staff corridor. The familiar backstage smell rushed at me. Dust, sweat, rosin, and disinfectant. The world of velvet seats and chandeliers vanished behind the heavy door. Here, everything was narrow, practical, and decorated. The lights were harsh and white. I exhaled, as if I'd been holding my breath for 2 hours. My plan was simple: cut through the corridor, grab my tool case from the rehearsal room, sign out at the staff desk, and leave. I had done this routine 100 times, but the universe, as I would learn, had a taste for clumsy timing. As I rounded the corner at the end of the hallway, carrying the worn black case that held my screwdrivers, tuning hammer, and voicing tools, someone came from the opposite direction. Fast, too fast. We collided. My boot slid on a patch of melted snow that had been tracked in earlier. The case flew out of my hand. Metal clicked and clanged as tools rattled inside. My balance vanished for a second, and I saw, with horrible clarity, the floor rushing up to meet my face. A hand closed around my wrist. Strong, warm, and surprised. The impact never came. I stumbled, my knees bending, my shoulder twisting, but instead of the ground, I crashed against a solid chest that smelled faintly of laundry soap, cologne, and something like cold air trapped in wool. I stared at a wall of black fabric. Then I looked up. It was him, Adrian Weiss, in the same black tailcoat. His bow tie loosened slightly, a faint sheen of sweat still on his forehead from the performance. Up close, his eyes were pale gray, almost silver, framed by thick lashes that would have been pretty if the rest of his face weren't so severe. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Our breaths hung white in the cold corridor air. Someone had opened a door to the outside further down, letting in a draft. I started, words tingling. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. It's all right, he said. His German accented but fluid. His voice lower than I expected. Calm, controlled. He released my wrist once he was sure I had my balance. My skin tingled where his fingers had been, as if they had left an invisible print. My heart, apparently having forgotten how to behave, raced as if I'd run up several flights of stairs instead of simply falling into a man. My tool case lay on the floor between us. Its latches sprung open from the impact. A few screwdrivers had spilled out, a felt wedge, a small tuning fork that had rolled close to his shoe. He bent down immediately, before I could, and picked up the tuning fork. He turned it between his fingers, the metal catching the fluorescent light. Piano technician? He asked. Yes, I said. My voice came out as soft. I cleared my throat. Yes, I am. I work for the hall sometimes. Ryan. Leah, if that's easier. I cursed myself for talking too much. Leah, he repeated, as if testing the sound. He placed the tuning fork gently back in the case, then handed it to me. Thank you for taking care of the instruments. They sounded dependable tonight. I almost laughed. I had been called many things in my life. Dependable was rarely one of them. Glad they behaved. I said instead. They have tempers. He gave the faintest hint of a smile at that. Just a small softening round his mouth. Don't we all? For a second, something in the air shifted. It might have been nothing, a shared joke in a cold corridor, to professionals acknowledging each other's invisible work. But my heart, being uncooperative, registered it as possibility. Were you in the hall? He asked, listening. Yes, I admitted. Last row, hidden behind a pillar, illegally, probably. Then you risked a lot for the last row, he said. And now there was actual warmth in his voice. I hope it was worth it. It was, I said, much too quickly. Then, softer, more careful. It was astonishing. Silence fell again. Not uncomfortable. Exactly. Just charged. He watched me with that same focused attention he gave his orchestra, and I had the absurd feeling that he could hear the uneven rhythm of my pulse. Then his gaze moved past me. His eyes flicked to the door at the far end of the corridor. People were passing, musicians, stagehands, a woman in a black dress carrying flowers. He scanned their faces in a quick, restless sweep. I saw it then, unmistakable expectation. He was looking for someone. The faint softness that had appeared in his features a moment ago tightened into something more guarded. He checked his watch, then the door again, as if the person he was waiting for had said they would meet him here, exactly here, after the concert. My chest went strangely hollow. Are you waiting for someone? I asked, before I could stop myself. He seemed to remember my existence, blinked, and gave a small, apologetic tilt of his head. Yes, he said. An old friend. He stopped, reconsidered his words. She is late. Of course. The corridor suddenly felt narrower, as if the walls had moved in by a few centimeters. I hugged the tool case to my chest like a shield. Well, I said, forcing a light sigh. Did not feel. Great artists are allowed to be fashionably late, aren't they? He looked at me again, really looked, as if weighing what to say. Something like exhaustion crossed his eyes. There and gone in an instant. Some of them, he said quietly, never arrive at all. The sentence landed between us like a dropped glass. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I knew the tone too well. It was the tone of someone whose story did not belong to me. He straightened, the conductor's posture sliding back into place like armor. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to keep you. Thank you again, Leah, for your work. It's nothing, I said. Have a good night, Maestro Weiss, Adrian. He corrected. Off stage. It's just Adrian. Then, good night, Adrian. He gave a small nod and stepped round me, walking toward the door at the end of the corridor. As he passed under the harsh white light, I noticed there were still tiny flecks of flower petals on his shoes, remnants from the stage. I watched him pause near the exit, glance outside at the falling snow, then check his phone. He typed something, perhaps a message. Perhaps nothing, then slipped the device back into his pocket. He waited. I turned away before I could witness the moment he realized she wasn't coming. Or perhaps she had never promised to come at all and the waiting was a habit he hadn't yet learned. As I walked in the opposite direction, corridor stretching long and pale ahead of me, one thought circled stubbornly in my mind. I'm already falling for a man whose heart is clearly somewhere else. It was ridiculous. It was premature. It was unfair to him, to myself. It was also true, and that was the night I first heard his orchestra, the night our paths crossed in a badly lit corridor, the night I should have turned around and chosen a safer story. Instead, I kept walking deeper into his. The night he brought me the piano, the rain was falling so hard the street looked like it was drowning. I was about to lock up the workshop and head home when I heard the knock, 3 sharp, impatient taps like someone trying to keep themselves from falling apart. When I opened the door, he was standing there. Adrian Weiss, soaked, breathing unevenly, holding a tarp-covered upright piano on a dolly, as if it were a wounded soldier he refused to abandon. For a second, I forgot how to speak. English version. The wind shoved cold air into the workshop the moment I opened the door. Rain hammered the pavement behind him, turning the street into a sheet of reflective silver. Adrian's hair was plastered to his forehead, and droplets clung to the edges of his coat. He didn't look glamorous like he had on stage. He looked human, messy, rain-struck, and strangely young. "Leah," he said, exhaling as if relieved I was real. "Thank God you're still here." I blinked. What is going on?" He stepped aside, gesturing to the piano on the dolly behind him. The tarp was thick but already dripping water. "I need your help. It's urgent." A drenched tarp and a panicked conductor usually meant disaster. "The piano, is it damaged?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not exactly, but it needs to be repaired. Properly, carefully." I tried calling 3 shops. No one answered. "You were the only one still working." I swallowed. "What happened to it?" He placed one hand on top of the piano. His fingers rested there for a moment too long, almost tenderly. "It belonged to someone important," he said softly. "Someone I cared about." Those words landed like cold water down my spine. I stepped back, letting him roll the piano into the workshop. The wheels squeaked, water dripping onto the floor. He pushed it in slowly, carefully, as if afraid that any abrupt motion might break something irreparable. When he pulled the tarp off, I saw the instrument fully. It wasn't expensive and old upright, the kind found in student apartments or modest music classrooms. The wood was scratched, veneer faded, but there was something intimate about it, like it had been played more by hands that loved music than hands that mastered it. I touched the lid. "This is very old." "Yes." He ran his thumb along a dent near the top. Clara, used to practice on this when we were students." There it was, the name from his score, Clara. My chest tightened, as if my lungs needed more space than my ribs could provide. I tried to sound neutral. "Is she okay?" He let out a brittle laugh. "I don't know. I haven't seen her in months." A pause, maybe years, if I'm honest. That surprised me. He looked around the workshop dust, tools, wood, half-open cabinets like he was looking for something to anger himself too. "I found this piano in storage," he continued. "They were going to throw it out. I couldn't let that happen, because it belonged to her. Because even now, she was still a part of him." I swallowed the ache rising in my throat. "Professional. Stay professional. Let me look at it," I said, bending down to examine the pedals. Rain pattered against the window. He stood behind me, silent except for his uneven breathing. The inside was damp. My heart sank. "Adrian, it's wet." "I know," he said quietly. "I got caught in the storm, and you brought it anyway." "I had to." His voice cracked. That one small fracture in his tone hit me harder than shouting ever could. I stood up slowly. We were close enough that I could feel the residual cold of the rain off his coat. "This is going to take time," I said gently. "The keys need drying. The action needs checking. The strings might rust. I don't care how long it takes." His eyes met mine, raw and pleading. "Just, please save it." He wasn't talking about the piano. Not really. But I nodded. "I'll do everything I can." Relief broke across his face, softening everything sharp about him. "Thank you." He sat down on a wooden stool near my tool chest, dripping puddles onto the floor, watching me like someone who had run out of places to go. I began working, removing the front panel, checking the dampness, laying cloth beneath the action. The rain outside thundered on. At one point, he spoke again. "Leah, do you ever fix something?" he asked, voice low. "Not because it can be saved, but because you're not ready to let it go." The screwdriver slipped in my hand, almost falling. I looked up at him. His expression was unguarded, vulnerable in a way that felt too intimate for the little distance between us. "I think," I said slowly, "that everyone has someone, or something, they're afraid to let go." His eyes lowered. "Even when letting go is the right thing." A silence more painful than noise settled between us. The storm outside softened to a drizzle. When I finally closed the panel of the piano for the night, I turned to tell him I'd start repairs tomorrow. But he had fallen asleep sitting up, head bowed, hands clasped loosely in his lap, rain still drying in his hair, completely worn out. I draped a workshop blanket over his shoulders. He didn't wake. In the dim light of the small lamp, he looked nothing like the man on stage. Here, he looked breakable, and that terrified me more than anything. Because I knew deeply, instinctively, that I was going to fall for him harder than was safe, and that he still belonged to a woman who wasn't here. The morning after he fell asleep in my workshop, he pretended none of it had happened. That should have been my first warning. A man who can erase his own vulnerability overnight will never hesitate to erase yours. English version. When I got to the workshop, the sky over Vienna was a pale, washed-out blue, as if the rain had scrubbed the color off the city. The streets were still damp, puddles reflected crooked pieces of buildings and street lamps. I unlocked the door, half expecting the workshop to feel different after what had happened. It didn't. The same smell of dust and wood varnish, the same squeak from the third floorboard on the left, the same clutter of tools and half-dismantled instruments. Only one thing had changed: the man sitting beside Clara's piano. Adrian sat on the same stool as last night, but he was fully awake now, back straight, coat neatly folded beside him. His hair was still slightly unruly, but not with rain, just with the stubbornness of curls that refused to obey. A paper cup of coffee rested in his hands, steam curling upward. He looked like he had been awake for hours. "Good morning," he said, as if he spent the night in chairs at strangers' workshops every day. "Morning," I replied, setting my bag down. "You know I don't usually offer overnight accommodations. There's no breakfast included." A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth. "I'll keep that in mind." He glanced round, as if trying to measure how embarrassing it was that he had passed out here. "I'm sorry," he added, "about last night. I didn't mean to fall asleep on your furniture." "It happens," I said. "At least you didn't fall on my piano." "Give me time," he murmured. "I might manage that later." I laughed in spite of myself. The sound felt too loud in the quiet room. His eyes softened, like he was relieved I wasn't pushing for explanations he wasn't ready to give. He nodded toward the upright. "How is she?" He had said she, not it. My throat tightened. "I need to take her apart more before I know for sure," I said. "The moisture didn't get too deep, but the action's going to need work. This will be a long-term project, not a quick fix." He nodded once, seriously, as if I were delivering a medical diagnosis. "I understand. You don't have to stay," I added. "It will be a lot of me swearing at rust and talking to myself. Very boring. I'm used to rehearsals," he said. "I've experienced worse. Still, don't you have an orchestra to terrify?" His coffee paused halfway to his lips. "I do," he admitted. "Rehearsal at 11. I just wanted to check on the piano first." The way he said the piano made it sound like the heart I haven't managed to bury yet. I cleared my throat. "Well, she's here. She's not going anywhere, unlike some people," he murmured under his breath. I pretended I didn't hear that. An awkward beat passed. Then he stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from his shirt. "Let me at least say thank you properly. There's a cafe round the corner. May I buy you coffee before the orchestra claims me for the day?" The rational part of me knew I should say no. The irrational part, the one that had spent last night watching his sleeping profile under a yellow lamp, said, "You'll regret refusing this small thing more than you'll regret accepting it." "Fine," I said, "but only if it comes with a croissant. I don't forgive exhaustion cheaply." His mouth curved. Done. The cafe around the corner was small, with fogged windows and shelves lined with jars of coffee beans. The bell above the door chimed when we walked in. A middle-aged woman behind the counter nodded at me in recognition. "I sometimes came here after late shifts." "Your usual?" she asked in German. "Today I'm brave," I said. "Make it stronger." "And for your friend?" She glanced at Adrian, then did a double take, squinting as if trying to place him. Recognition flickered, but to her credit, she didn't say his name out loud. "Black coffee," he said. "No sugar." "Of course." We found a small table by the window. Outside, people hurried along in coats and scarves, their breath visible in the cold. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like coffee, butter, and something sweet in the oven. For a while we just sat there, both of us cupping our drinks, letting the silence stretch without forcing it to be anything else. "You don't sleep much, do you?" I asked finally. He huffed out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "How did you know you were awake before me?" "That's suspicious. I've had practice." He stirred his coffee with a small metal spoon, but there was nothing to dissolve. "My mind is loud. It doesn't respect visiting hours." "Mine too," I said before thinking. "That's why I fix broken things. It's easier than fixing myself." He glanced up at me, eyes warmed by a brief flash of recognition. "That's the most honest sentence I've heard all week. I charge extra for those. Send me the invoice," he said. "I'll ignore it like all the others." We shared a smile that felt dangerously like familiarity. I traced the rim of my cup with my fingertip. So, the piano. You said it belonged to someone important. His gaze dropped to the dark surface of his coffee. Yes, Clara, I added gently. Her name tasted strange in my mouth, like a borrowed word I had no right to use. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, not quite pain, more like the echo of both. Yes, he said again. Quieter. What happened? The question slipped out before I could stop it, soft enough that he could pretend not to have heard. He didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under the shift of weight, and stared past me, through the window, at nothing in particular. We met at school, he said finally, to poor students who thought music could save them. Did it? I asked. For a while, his fingers tightened subtly around the mug handle. We played everything together, he continued. Competitions, recitals, terrible paying gigs in churches and hotel lobbies. People said we were inseparable. We believed them. Past tense, I said softly. He gave a small, humorless smile. Life has a way of making liars out of adjectives. That's poetic, I said. Do you rehearse these lines in the mirror? No, he said. I rehearse scores. My lines improvise themselves. I wanted to ask the real question, why aren't you together now? But something in his posture warned me away. His shoulders had gone rigid. His jaw clenched. There were doors inside him that were closed, and I had not earned any keys. So I took a safer route. The piece you conducted the other night, I said. The second movement. It felt like a memory. His eyes flicked up in surprise. You felt that? I fix instruments. Adrian, I said. Not people, but I'm not completely numb. That movement hurt. Beautifully. But it hurt. He exhaled slowly. It was written during the year she left. Left. Not died. Not disappeared. Left. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with him. I knew what it was like to be the one who stayed behind while someone walked away towards something brighter. Why do you still conduct it? Then, I asked, isn't it torture? He stared into his coffee, as if the answer were written at the bottom of the cup. Sometimes, he said, we keep telling the same story because we're afraid that if we stop, it will be like it never happened, like we invented the whole thing. If you loved her, it happened, I said. The words surprised me. They came out firm, almost sharp. It's real, whether you play that piece again or not. A faint crack appeared in his composure. His eyes met mine, really met the man for a moment. There was a naked honesty there that made me forget the rest of the cafe existed. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He flinched like he'd been struck. The screen lit up. I saw, for a heartbeat, only part of the notification. A name starting with C and an old photo thumbnail, stage lights, a microphone, the curve of a woman's shoulder. He turned the phone face down so quickly it rattled against the wood. His entire body changed. The openness vanished. His gaze shuddered, walls slamming back into place as if someone had pulled a lever. I should be going, he said, voice suddenly formal. The orchestra waits for no one, not even sentiment. Just like that, we were strangers in a public place again. I swallowed the disappointment, feeling ridiculous for letting a single coffee break convince me we were closer than we were. Of course, I said lightly. Wouldn't want the violins to revolt. Thank you for the coffee, he said, even though he had bought it. And for everything else you're doing. He stood, put his coat back on, and left before I could respond. The bell above the door chimed. Cold air rushed in, then disappeared with him. I sat there for a long moment, staring at his half-empty cup. The woman behind the counter came by to collect the dishes. New friend? She asked, tone casual but eyes curious. He's just a client, I said. The lie didn't sound convincing, even to me. Later that morning, I was back in the rehearsal room at the Music Verein, my hands deep inside a grand piano that had suffered under too many aggressive pianists and not enough respect. Dust rose in tiny clouds every time I adjusted a hammer. The room smelled of rosin and stale air, the kind of scent that belonged to spaces where music spent more time being constructed than admired. Is it bad? A voice asked from behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I recognized the specific flavor of stillness that accompanied Adrian, the way even silence seemed to range itself around him, waiting. It's offended, I said, still bent over the action. Not dead, but the middle register thinks it's been personally wronged. I know the feeling, he said softly. I straightened, wiping dust from my hands onto my work apron. You asked them to call me for this. Yes. He leaned against the wall, arms loosely crossed, watching me. If we're playing Mahler this week, I don't want the piano to sound like it's giving up halfway through the conversation. Reasonable, I said. Mahler would haunt you personally. He already does, Adrian replied. A few orchestra players were scattered around the room, warming up. Viola scales, a trumpet trying out a fragment of melody, the low thrum of a double bass. The sound reminded me of a city before dawn, everyone awake but not yet performing themselves. I tested a few chords. The notes blended more smoothly now, less brittle. Better, I said. You'll have your drama. Good, he said. I wouldn't know what to do without drama. He walked over, stopping beside the piano, up close, and to the institutional lighting. He looked tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. The gray of his eyes seemed even paler. I stepped aside to give him space. Want to test it? I don't play in public, he said automatically, then caught himself. At least not anymore. This isn't public, I said. Just a room full of professional eavesdroppers. To my surprise, a real smile flashed across his face. You're impossible. Most useful people are, I said. He hesitated, then slid onto the bench. His fingers hovered above the keys for a second, like he was greeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years. Then he played. Not much, just a few chords, a progression that was simple on the surface but laced with shifting harmonies underneath. It wasn't Mahler. It wasn't anything I recognized. It was his. Is that yours? I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. His fingers lingered on a dissonance, resolving it at the last possible second into something unexpectedly gentle. It was supposed to be, he said, a piece for voice and orchestra. For her? The question came out before I could stop it. His hands stilled. Yes. Clara again. The ghost in every room of his life. He lifted his hands away from the keys, as if touching the piano physically hurt. This is dangerous territory, Leah, he said. You're going to start charging me for therapy sessions soon. I can add it to the invoice, I said, trying to sound light. 1 hour of piano repair, 30 minutes of emotional triage. His lips twitched, but the sadness in his eyes didn't ease. The problem is, you can repair a piano. You can't repair history. Dust floated between us in a beam of light, tiny particles drifting without direction. Maybe not, I said, but you can decide when to stop playing the same piece. He looked at me then, sharply, like I touched something I wasn't supposed to see. Some pieces, he said, refused to end. Before I could answer, the concertmaster called his name. Maestro, are we starting? He stood up, the transformation almost instantaneous. In a heartbeat, the thoughtful, uncertain man at the piano vanished. The conductor took his place. His shoulders straightened, his voice firm. Yes, he said, from the second movement. Let's wake the dead, shall we? Laughter rippled through the orchestra. I stepped back, becoming just another shadow at the edge of the room. As the rehearsal began, I watched from the corner. On the podium, Adrian was someone else entirely. Or maybe this was who he truly was, and the man in my workshop was the borrowed version. He cued the strings, and they responded with that same disciplined intensity I'd heard in the concert. He demanded crescendos with a lift of his hand, carved delicate phrases with small, precise gestures. He stopped them often, explaining, demonstrating, chasing a sound only he seemed to hear fully. At one point, they ran through a passage where the melody soared above the rest of the orchestra, played by the oboe in place of a missing voice. The line was so aching, so human. My throat closed up. This should feel like someone is trying to say something, he told the players, and failing to find the right words. I wondered who he was thinking of when he said that. The rehearsal stretched on. I pretended to take notes on the piano, but mostly I watched him. It was a dangerous habit to start. By the time they reached the end of the movement, everyone was sweating, frustrated, exhilarated. Again, he said. Groans, scattered and affectionate. Last time, he promised. Then I'll let you all hate me in peace. They played again, better, closer to whatever memory he kept chasing. When he finally gave them a break, the room exploded into chatter. Someone laughed aloud. Someone cursed under their breath about a tricky passage. A clarinetist flirted with a cellist. Life, messy and bright, flooded back in. Adrian stepped off the podium and, for a moment, seemed uncertain where to go. Then he walked toward me. "You survived," I said. "No one threw a bow at you. I'm impressed." "It's early," he replied. Up close, sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. His hair was damp again, but this time from effort rather than rain. "Thank you for the piano," he said. It felt different, less offended, more expressive. I said, "You're welcome." We stood there, a half-meter of air between us, crowded with things unsaid. The question sat on my tongue. Will you ever write something that isn't for her? A selfish question, born of the tiny, traitorous hope that there might one day be space in his music where someone like me could exist. Instead, I said, "Do you ever get tired of reliving the same emotion for an audience?" He seemed taken aback. "What do you mean, every time you conduct that piece?" I said, nodding toward the open score on the stand. "You go back there, to the year," she laughed, "to everything you felt. Doesn't it wear you down?" He followed my gaze, looking at the notes as if he'd never seen them before. "Yes," he said quietly, "it does." "Then why?" "Because the alternative," he interrupted, "is admitting that I don't know who I am without that story." His honesty knocked the air out of me. We stared at each other, holding a fragile shard of truth between us. Then someone called his name again, and the shard shattered. "Duty calls," he said, stepping back. "Go terrify your violins," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He gave me a brief, almost apologetic smile, then turned away. I stayed until the end of the rehearsal, pretending to busy myself with the piano, but really listening, watching, learning the map of his gestures, as if knowing them would somehow protect me. It wouldn't. That evening, back in my workshop, I stood alone in front of Clara's piano. The room was quiet. The only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hush of cars passing outside. I placed my hand on the worn wood where his fingers had rested. Someone had carved initials into the side of the piano years ago. C+A, scratched clumsily, like the work of teenagers who believed they could trap time with a pocket knife. C+A. Clara and Adrian. I traced the letters with my thumb. "You're everywhere," I whispered to a woman I had never met. In his music, in his eyes when his phone lit up. On this old wooden surface that still took up space in my workshop, in my days, in my thoughts. I could feel it happening inside me, the slow, irreversible shift from interested to attached, from curious to doomed. I told myself it was just a phase, a harmless, temporary infatuation with a complicated man and his complicated ghosts. I lied. I pulled my hand away from the piano and went to work, tightening screws, measuring humidity, making notes. Dust settled on my skin, dry and fine, clinging to every exposed surface. I thought of what I'd told him earlier about everyone having something they aren't ready to let go of. For him, it was Clara. For me, it was the hope, fragile, foolish, that one day, his music might stop spelling someone else's name. I brushed dust off the keys with the back of my hand. It came back immediately. Some things, no matter how often you try to clean them away, always return. The first time I saw her name on his music, it was just a small, neat line of ink. By the third score, it felt like a warning label I had been too slow to read. English version. The archive room of the Music Verein was the opposite of the golden hall upstairs. No chandeliers, no velvet seats, no breathless applause, just shelves, endless shelves of scores and parts, the air thick with paper and dust and old ink. I had come down to return a borrowed score. One of the rehearsal librarians, a gentleman named Otto, sometimes let me read through the pieces on quiet days. Music looked different on the page than it did in sound. On the stand, it was emotion. Here, it was architecture. Back again. "Ferguline Leah?" Otto asked, peering at me over his glasses as I stepped in. "Yes," I said, holding out the score. "I brought Mahler back unharmed. He didn't haunt my apartment." Otto smiled, the wrinkles round his eyes folding like well-worn paper. "He only haunts conductors, I assure you." "Lucky me," I said. He chuckled and took the score from my hands, sliding it into its place with the affectionate care of someone shelving beloved novels. "You're just in time, actually. I could use an extra pair of hands. We had a delivery from Prague, some older editions. They need sorting." "From Prague," I repeated. "Yes." A conductor exchanged some of his personal library with ours. All very dramatic. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. I believe his name was Weiss. My heart tripped. Adrian Weiss, I asked, as casually as I could manage. Yes, that one. Otto waved vaguely. Tall, brooding. My interns are in love with his cheekbones. He's deposited quite a few treasures here. Of course he had. He probably couldn't keep his home shelves from overflowing. If you'd like to help, Otto continued, there's a stack on the side table. We just need them labeled and logged. You can peek inside, he added with a wink. Scores don't mind being stared at. I can do that, I said. He led me to a small wooden table near the back. A tower of scores lay there, gently leaning. Symphonies, concertos, chamber works. Some were worn at the edges, others looked almost new. I sat down, pulling the first one toward me. It was an orchestral score ravel, delicate and precise. I opened the cover and saw, in black ink on the first page, a small inscription in tidy handwriting. To C, who heard this color long before I did. AC. My stomach tightened. Maybe it was a coincidence. C could be anyone. Charlotte, Cecilia, Carmen, 1,000 other names. I moved to the next score. Mahler, the same handwriting on the inside cover. For C, who believed in the long symphonie when no one else had patience. I swallowed. The air suddenly felt warmer. I opened another, and another. For C, always. For C, who was in every slow movement anyway. For C, who taught me to listen. Ink, everywhere. The same initial, the same quiet devotion repeated like a refrain over years. Sometimes at the top of the first page, sometimes in the margin, sometimes almost hidden near the bottom of the title. It was as if every piece he touched had to carry her initial, like a secret dedication visible only to anyone who bothered to open the score. I sat very still, my fingers resting on the smooth paper. Everything all right? Otto asked from the other side of the room. Fine, I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I just sneezed internally. He laughed, apparently satisfied, and went back to fighting with the label printer. I looked down again. For C, I thought of his phone lighting up in the cafe, the blurred thumbnail of a woman's shoulder on a stage. I thought of the way he had scanned the hall after the concert, searching for someone who wasn't there. I thought of the initials carved into the side of the old piano in my workshop, C+A. Everywhere I looked, they had gotten there first. Later that day, during the musician's break, I found myself in the cantina narrow room with two bright light, long tables, and the constant smell of soup and industrial coffee. I wasn't really hungry, but I'd learned that if you sat very quietly in places like this, you could hear entire biographies told in fragments. I took a bowl of something vaguely yellow and sat at the edge of a table close enough to eavesdrop, far enough not to intrude. At the next table, two violinists and a horn player were talking, their instruments stacked beside their trays. I swear, he's getting stricter, one of the violinists said, stabbing a piece of bread like it had personally offended her. If we breathe too loudly between phrases, he glares. That's just his face, the horn player said cheerfully. Permaglare comes with the job. The other violinist shook his head. He wasn't always like this, you know. Oh, the first asked. You speak from ancient legend. I played under him 6 years ago, the man said. Different orchestra, different country, before he went to Paris. And, the horn player leaned forward. Was he fun? He smiled more, the violinist said. Or at least he seemed capable of it. He used to crack jokes in rehearsal about missing entrances, wrong dynamics, the usual. And there was always this woman with him. My fork froze midway to my mouth. His agent, the horn player asked. No. Singer, the violinist frowned, searching his memory. Clara something. Dark hair. Big laugh. Voice that made critics use too many adjectives. That Clara, the first violinist said, rolling her eyes. My teacher still has her poster on his wall. She disappeared, didn't she? Stop singing out of nowhere. Not out of nowhere, the man said. She got offered something big in Berlin. Opera house. Spotlight. I don't know the details, but, she laughed. Right before an important debut of his too. He showed up to rehearsal like a ghost. Conducted like the world was ending. Then he went to Paris. So she dumped him for a bigger stage. The horn player summarized. Classic. I drink to that if this coffee weren't a crime against humanity. They laughed. I didn't. The violinist added, quieter. They were stupid in love. The kind of couple that convinced you they were going to conquer the world together. We were all a little jealous. When she left, it scared everyone more than we admitted. If they couldn't make it, if they couldn't, the first violinist interrupted. What does that say about the rest of us? Yes, very tragic. Now he conducts like he has a gun to his head, and we all pretend it's just artistic intensity. You're harsh, the horn player said, though he didn't disagree. I'm practical, she replied. Maestros and their ghosts are bad for tuning. They laughed again. Balls clinked. Someone dropped a fork. I stared at my soup until the surface stopped rippling. So that was the story, or one version of it, pieced together from backstage mythology. Two young musicians in love. Her voice, his baton, the world in front of them. And then, at some invisible crossroad, she turned left. He kept going straight and never adjusted the map. Stupid, I told myself. Stupid to feel this much from a story that wasn't mine. I pushed the soup away. Appetite had become a foreign concept. That afternoon, I went back to the workshop and stood in front of Clara's piano again. Sunlight filtered through the high window, catching in the dust motes drifting lazily in the air. The city sounded distant from here, like someone else's life on the other side of a wall. I opened the fallboard and touched the keys. They were dry now, the worst of the moisture gone, but still a little swollen in places. The piano was halfway between broken and healed like him, like me, like most things that have been carried through storms. I sat down and pressed a chord. The sound was dull but honest. For see, who is in every slow movement anyway? I murmured, recalling the inscription from one of his scores. What did it feel like? I wondered, to be that person, the one whose initial appears on everything he touches, the one who exists in every piece he conducts, whether the audience knows it or not. It must be intoxicating. It must also be a burden. Neither role belonged to me. The door creaked open behind me. You're talking to my piano, Adrian's voice said. Should I be concerned? I startled, my fingers slipping and producing an ugly clash of notes. You walk quietly, I protested, turning round. That should be illegal. He stood there, coat open, scarf loosely draped round his neck, a rehearsal mark still penciled on the back of his left hand. His hair was slightly damp again, this time from snow instead of rain. I didn't mean to scare you, he said. I knocked. The piano answered instead. It's offended, I said. We're working on it. His gaze moved to the instrument. Something in his face softened. How is she? Recovering, I replied. Slowly. It'll take a while before she forgives being dragged through a storm. He smiled faintly. She always had a temper. The familiarity of his tone pricked at me. I stood up, wiping non-existent dust off my hands just to have something to do. How's the orchestra? Also offended, he said. We're working on it. We shared a small, lopsided smile. Then I decided to hold a match over gasoline. I was in the archives this morning, I said casually, helping Otto with some scores. He blinked. Were you? He mentioned your donation. I went on. From Prague. His jaw tightened very slightly. I opened a few of them. I kept my eyes on the piano, pretending this was idle chatter. You write on your scores. A lot. Silence pressed in for a second. What did you see? He asked, voice carefully neutral. I turned to face him. Inscriptions, I said. Small ones, on the inside covers. Proceed to see things like that. His expression barely shifted, but I saw it, the flash of recognition, the quick wall rising behind his eyes. Old habits, he said lightly. I was sentimental once. Only once. I asked. Once was enough. He said it like a joke. It didn't sound like one. I took a breath I wasn't sure I should take. They said in the canteen that you used to tour with her, Clara. His lips parted, then closed again. For a moment, he looked caught between irritation and exhaustion. They talk too much, he said. Musicians, I said. Talking, who could have predicted? Despite himself, he huffed out a small laugh. Then his shoulders slumped a fraction. What did they say? He asked quietly. That you were stupid in love, I said honestly. That people were jealous of you both. That she left for Berlin before an important concert. That you showed up like a ghost. My voice softened. That you haven't really been the same since. He stared at me for a long moment. I expected him to shut down completely, to tell me it was none of my business, to walk out. Instead, He walked toward the piano. Do you know what conductors are? He asked, tracing the edge of the instrument with his fingers. People think we're dictators or magicians, but really, we're translators. We take dots on a page and turn them into something people can feel. That sounds like a magician to me, I said. He shook his head. Magicians make things disappear. We just prove they were there in the first place. His hand stopped near the carved initials. His thumb brushed over them. She wrote those, he said, almost to himself. In our second year, I was furious. I told her she'd ruined the piano. She said pianos were meant to be ruined by love and bad rehearsals. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. Then it died. I started writing her initial on the scores almost as a joke. He continued. At first it was just ours pieces we performed together, little recitals in tiny halls that smelled of damp wood and fear. Then it became everything. Why? I asked. The word came out softer than I expected. Because she was in everything, he said simply. In how I heard a phrase, in how I shaped a crescendo, in whether I believed the music could be more than just organized noise. She made me braver. The honesty in his voice hurt more than any lie could have. And when she left, I whispered. He exhaled through his nose, a humorless sound. Berlin called, he said. Agents, contracts, critics. She tried to make it sound like an exciting new chapter. Maybe it was. For her. He looked at me, gray eyes suddenly sharp. She asked me to come with her, leave my orchestra, start over in a place where no one knew us. And you didn't go. I had worked yours to build something there, he said. An ensemble that trusted me, a city that tolerated me, a programming season that was finally my own. I thought love would understand that. Did it? I asked. No, he said. Love packed her suitcases and went to Berlin. The words were flat, not dramatic, not bitter, just tired. How long ago? I asked. Long enough that I should have turned the page by now, he said. Not long enough that my hand knows how to stop writing her initial when I pick up a pen. The room felt smaller. I stood there, absorbing this, feeling the familiar tug-of-war inside me, the urge to comfort him, and the instinct to protect myself from being dragged into someone else's unresolved story. You're allowed to miss her, I said. Even now. He studied me, like he was trying to decide if I was being naive or kind. I don't know if I miss her, he said slowly, or the version of myself that existed when she was still within arm's reach. That sentence lodged somewhere under my sternum and stayed there. Either way, I said, you keep conducting the same piece. Yes, he said, because if I stop, I'm afraid I'll have nothing left to say. The part of me that still believed in repair spoke up before the rest could silence it. You could write something new, I suggested, for someone else, or for no one, just for yourself. His gaze flickered, as if the idea physically stung. New dedications don't erase old ink, he said. No, I agreed, but they make more pages. We stood in silence, the piano between us like a witness. For a moment, it felt like something might shift a door opening, even just a crack. He looked at me with a kind of searching uncertainty, as if seeing me fully for the first time. Then his phone buzzed. Again. That sharp little sound that kept slicing through any fragile intimacy we managed to build. He glanced at the screen. This time I saw it clearly. Clara. Just her name. No thumbnail. No preview. Just that one word glowing up at him like a summoned ghost. His hand tightened around the device. His throat worked. I have to take this, he said. Of course he did. I stepped back, making space. Go, I said. The piano and I will talk about our abandonment issues. A corner of his mouth twitched, but his eyes had already gone distant. He answered the call as he walked toward the door, his voice dropping low, almost gentle. Clara, I heard him say, you pick a hell of a time. The door closed behind him. The room felt colder. I looked down at the keys beneath my fingers. For C, I thought. Always for C. I pressed a single note. It sounded small in the empty workshop. That was the moment I stopped lying to myself. I was not just a technician fixing a broken piano. I was not just a passerby in a conductor's orbit. I was a woman standing on the wrong side of a story that had started long before I arrived. And no matter how carefully I stepped, I was always going to land on someone else's name. The night we almost became something more, Vienna disappeared under snow. Inside the workshop, it was just the two of us, a faulty radiator, and all the things we did not dare to name. English version. By late afternoon, the snow had started quietly, as if it were trying not to interrupt anything important. Tiny flakes drifted down past the workshop window, melting the second they touched the glass. By early evening, they had stopped being polite. The city vanished. The street outside turned into a moving white wall. I was bent over Claire's piano, tightening a screw that had decided to be difficult, when my phone vibrated on the workbench. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up. Tram service suspended due to weather conditions. Expect delays. I stared at the notification, then looked at the window again. The snow was no longer pretty. It was relentless. Of course, the one night I'd stayed late to just finish this one adjustment, the sky decided to collapse. I dragged my coat on and reached for the light switch, already calculating how long it would take to walk home if I braved the storm. The door opened before I could turn off the lights. Adrian stepped inside, carrying a gust of frozen air with him. Snow clung to his shoulders, and hair like frost in a painting. He shut the door quickly, the wind still rattling it from the outside. "Don't tell me you walked here," I said. "Then I won't," he replied, brushing snow from his scarf. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, making him look younger, almost boyish. He noticed my coat in my hand. "You're leaving." That was the plan. I gestured vaguely at the window. Then Winter decided to declare war. He walked closer to the glass, peered out, and hissed softly through his teeth. "The tram stopped half an hour ago." I shoved my phone back into my pocket. "I was going to walk. It's just..." "What? 40 minutes? In this?" He turned back to me, eyebrows raised. "You disappear before the second intersection. You overestimate the snow and underestimate me." He gave me a look that said he wasn't amused. "Stay," he said simply. The word landed between us like a physical object. "I can't just, Leah." His voice was gentle, but firm. "It's a blizzard. The city's shutting down. This building is at least solid. You have heat." "Sort of." We both glanced at the ancient radiator, which hissed resentfully in the corner like an angry cat. It emitted the kind of warmth that was more philosophical than practical. "Besides," he added, "I was coming to check on the piano. If we're both trapped here, we can at least be trapped productively." "Do you always find ways to turn near-death situations into rehearsal?" I asked. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Occupational hazard." I hesitated. The adult part of me knew he was right. The stupid, fluttering part of me whispered that staying meant putting myself in danger of a different kind of storm. I hung my coat back on the hook. "Fine," I said. "But if we freeze to death, I'm haunting you." "You won't have to," he said. Mahler got there first. The hours blurred. The snow kept falling, thick and soundless. Outside, the world was swallowed in white. Inside, the workshop became a small island of yellow lamplight, sawdust, and breath. We worked side by side on the piano. He handed me tools when I reached without looking. I adjusted the action while he pressed keys slowly, listening for unevenness. It was the kind of wordless cooperation that usually comes only after years of partnership. We'd known each other for weeks. "Again," I said. "Play the same chord." He pressed it. I listened. Something still wasn't right. "Too slow," I muttered, tightening another screw by a fraction of a turn. "The hammer is sulking." "Do you talk to all your instruments like this?" he asked. "Only the ones with abandonment issues." "So all of them, pretty much." He smiled, small but genuine. At some point, the workshop grew colder. I could see my breath faintly when I exhaled. I rubbed my arms. He noticed. "The radiator is hopeless," he said. "We're playing survival on hard mode." "There's an electric heater in the storage closet," I said. "But if we plug it in, the building might explode." He considered this. "Worth the risk." "Depends," I said. "How attached are you to living?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the piano, then back to the window where the snow hadn't paused once. "More than I used to be," he said quietly. The answer lodged itself somewhere behind my ribs. We ended up finding the heater anyway. It wheezed like a dying animal but produced enough warmth to make the room bearable. We dragged it closer to the piano and sat on the floor in front of it during a break, backs against the side of the instrument. If this were anyone else, it would have been a perfectly ordinary situation. To people trapped by weather, sharing warmth and silence. But this was him, and I was me. and the piano above our heads still smelled faintly of another woman's name. How long until the storm passes? I asked. He checked his phone. The forecast says, not soon. Wonderful. You're stuck with me, he said. Tragic, I replied. We both smiled without looking at each other. After a while, the heater's buzzing became background noise. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms round them. My fingers were rough from cold metal and strings. His were nicked at the knuckles from paper cuts and careless baton collisions. Can I ask you something? I said. You usually do, he replied. Why did you bring the piano to me that night? Really? He was quiet for a long moment. I told you, he said eventually. They were going to throw it out. That's not an answer, I said gently. Not really. He let his head fall back against the piano, staring up at the underside of the keyboard. Do you always insist on the real answer? Yes, I said. It's a character flaw. He sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. I brought it, he said, because it was the last physical thing tying me to a version of my life that didn't end in a backstage phone call. I waited. When everything fell apart, he continued. The city felt contaminated. Every street corner, every rehearsal room, every cafe held some version of us. I could walk into a bakery and remember a fight we'd had over croissants. It was exhausting. Did you leave because of that? I asked. The city. I left because I thought distance would turn memory into something manageable. He laughed without humor. Turns out, memory has very good stamina. And the piano, it was in a storage room I almost never entered. Forgotten. Abandoned. His hand moved absently, fingers tracing a pattern on the floor. When I saw it, I thought, we're the same. You thought you were an old forgotten piano? I said. Obstinate. Temperamental. No longer fashionable. He said. Yes. That's ridiculous. I said. Is it? Yes. I turned my head to look at him. Pianos don't glare like you do. He smiled. Reluctantly. You brought it here instead of letting them throw it away, I said. That's not something a forgotten thing does. That's something a stubbornly alive thing does. He considered that. Maybe, he said. Silence stretched again, but it was softer now. Why did you come to Vienna? He asked suddenly. Really? That's not fair, I protested. I asked first. Equality, he said. We're modern, remember, I sighed. Fine. I looked at my hands, picking at a callus near my thumb. There was someone, I said. Back home. Of course there was. He murmured. He was. I searched for the right word. Safe, in the way that feels dangerous if you're not ready for it. He talked about apartments and retirement funds, and which school would be best for imaginary children we hadn't even named. He wanted me to choose the same city, the same life, every day, forever. And you didn't. I tried, I said. But every time I imagined it, I felt like a piano nailed to the floor. Useful, stable, unable to move an inch. You don't like stability? He asked. I like it just fine, I said. I don't like cages pretending to be stability. And Vienna is, what? Exactly, he asked. A delay, I said. A long, beautiful delay before I have to decide whether I'm brave or stupid. He turned his head, studying me with quiet curiosity. How long do you plan to delay? As long as the visas allow, I said. Then I'll panic. He smiled. This time more fully. The sight made something lift and sink inside me at the same time. Sometimes delay is the bravest choice, he said. Is that what you tell yourself? I asked. Yes, he said. Often. The heater buzzed. The snow whispered against the windows. Somewhere, a pipe clanged mournfully. We were closer than we had ever been, physically. Our shoulders almost brushed. I could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the tired smudges beneath his eyes. This feels like a confession booth, I said. Without the absolution, he replied. Do you want absolution? I asked. I don't know what I'd do with it, he said. I swallowed. Do you ever imagine it? I asked impulsively. Another version of your life. One where you went to Berlin with her. His jaw tightened. Yes, his voice was barely audible. Sometimes, and in those versions, he said. I'm still looking over my shoulder, wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed. So either way, you lose, I said. Yes, he said simply. The honesty between us felt dangerous, like standing on a frozen river and hearing the first crack beneath your feet. At some point, the lights flickered. First once, then twice. "Oh, no," I said. "Don't you dare," Adrian told the ceiling. The lights went out. Darkness dropped over us like a curtain. The heater died with a small, tragic wheeze. The sudden quiet rang in my ears. "Perfect," I muttered. "Just perfect. Stay where you are," he said. "Don't move." "I'm not a cat," I said. "I won't bolt into traffic. I don't trust this building not to have invented new ways to kill us." I heard him shuffle around in the dark. Then the scratch of a lighter. A small flame flared to life, illuminating his face from below. For a moment, he looked like a ghost telling a story around a campfire. "Dramatic," I said. "Very on brand." He found a candle in one of the drawers where I kept useless emergency supplies and lit it. Soft, uneven light filled the immediate area around the piano, leaving the corners of the workshop in shadow. "That's better," he said. "That's worse," I countered. "Now it looks like a scene from a black and white tragedy." He tilted his head, regarding me across the small flickering flame. "Maybe it is. Don't say things like that in candlelight," I said. "You'll confuse my nervous system." His eyes warmed with something I didn't dare name. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "It's cold," I lied. It was cold, but that wasn't why my hands wouldn't stay still. He hesitated, then shrugged off his coat and draped it over my shoulders. It was still warm from his body. The fabric smelled like wool, cologne, and something uniquely him rosin, ink, backstage air. For a moment, my heart forgot its rhythm. "Thank you," I said, my voice still small. He sat back down next to me, closer this time, as if the dark demanded less distance. The candle flame painted gentle gold on his cheekbones. We sat there, listening to the storm and the sound of our own breathing. "Leah," he said, almost in a whisper. "Yes, if I ask you something, will you answer honestly?" "You make that sound ominous," I said. "Maybe it is." I swallowed. "I'll try." He didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at the flame. "Do you regret meeting me?" he asked. The question caught me so off guard I forgot to be careful. "No," I said immediately. He exhaled, like he had been holding that breath for days. "You should," he said. "It would be safer." "I don't want safe," I said. "If I wanted safe, I wouldn't be here." He turned his head then, finally meeting my eyes. The way he looked at me made the room feel even smaller, like there was less air available for breathing. "You remind me," he said slowly, "that there is still something after everything." "After her," I translated silently in my chest. Sometimes I catch myself thinking. He trailed off, as if the thought itself were fragile. "That if I met you first, things might have been different." The words landed with the weight of a confession and the lightness of an impossible hypothesis all at once. My throat burned. "That's not fair," I said, forcing a crooked smile. "I'm terrible at hypotheticals." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." We fell quiet again. The candle had burned low, wax pulling at its base. Shadows danced on the walls, bending round shelves and tools. Outside, the snowstorm roared, muffled but relentless. Inside, the storm was quieter and infinitely more dangerous. He shifted slightly, turning his whole body toward me. His knee brushed mine. The touch jolted through me like electricity. "Leah," he said again, my name barely more than breath. "Tell me to stop." "Stop what?" I asked, even though I knew, even though the answer pulsed in the air between us. "This," he said. His hand moved, slow and hesitant, as if fighting its own instincts. His fingers brushed a strand of hair back from my face, tucking it behind my ear. His touch was careful, almost reverent. It made my chest ache. Every rational part of me screamed that this was a bad idea. Every irrational part of me had been moving toward this moment since the first time he caught my wrist in that corridor. I didn't tell him to stop. He leaned in, very slowly, like he was giving me 100 chances to change my mind. I could see the tiny line of the scar above his eyebrow, the faint stubble on his chin, the way his breath trembled just a little. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. His forehead almost touched mine. Our noses brushed. The distance between his mouth and mine was a fraction of a breath. "Leah," he whispered. "Yes," I breathed. He closed his eyes, and then he said her name. "Clara," he exhaled. The sound of it sliced through me more cleanly than any blade. I froze. His eyes flew open, horror flooding them as if he had only just heard himself. "No," he said immediately, pulling back like he'd been burned. No, I didn't, I laughed. It sounded nothing like laughter. Wow, I said. You really know how to make a girl feel special, Leah. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, that's not. I was not thinking of. Don't lie, I said, my own voice shaking now. You were? It's fine. It's very on brand. He looked devastated. Not exaggeratedly, not theatrically, just wrecked. That isn't fair to you, he said. None of this is fair to you. Correct, I said. Congratulations. You've finally said something we fully agree on. The candle guttered. The room tilted. I stood up too quickly, his coat slipping from my shoulders. I caught it, thrust it back toward him. Keep it, he said. You're cold. I'm a lot of things right now, I said. Cold is the least of them. Leah, I'm not angry at you. I lied. I'm angry at physics, at timing, at initials scratched into wood. His face twisted. You deserve someone whose first reflex isn't another person's name, he said. Yes, I said quietly. I do. The admission hung between us, fragile and heavy. And you, I added, deserve to not be haunted every time you try to reach for something new. He blinked. Is that what you think this is? I think, I said, that you're still standing in a house that burned down a long time ago, holding out your hands to the heat that isn't there anymore. And when you feel anything at all, you panic. His throat moved. Maybe. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly exhausted. You should answer her calls, I said, or stop answering, or write a piece you never show anyone. I don't know, but you can't keep doing this halfway thing. Not forever. He stared at me like I had just conducted a piece he'd been struggling with and shown him an interpretation he didn't want to acknowledge was true. I don't want to hurt you, he said. You already did, I said, but there was no anger left, only tiredness. It's okay. It's not fatal. The storm outside pounded on. Inside, something settled into place. Not closure. Not yet. Just clarity. I stepped back from the piano. I'll keep working on her, I said, nodding toward the instrument. Professionally, of course, he said. His voice sounded like something had been scraped out of it. You don't owe me anything else, I smiled, small and bitter. No, I don't. We stayed like that, a few feet apart, separated by air and a lifetime of other people's decisions. The lights flickered back on all at once. The heater whirred to life. The radiators groaned in protest. The storm outside continued, indifferent to our small human drama. I blinked in the sudden brightness. Looks like the city survived, I said. Barely, he murmured. We both knew I wasn't talking about the city anymore. That night, we did not become lovers. We became something worse, to people who had stepped to the very edge of a possible life together and watched it collapse under the weight of a single name. The poster went up before he told me. If he was ever planning to tell me at all. English version, it started with a piece of paper on a glass door. I wasn't even going into the music verein. I was just passing by, hands shoved into my pockets, head down against the wind, thinking about which glue would work best for a cracked bridge on a cello. Then something in red and gold caught my eye. A new concert announcement had been taped to the main entrance, glossy paper, heavy font, the kind that told you this was important and expected to sell out. Adrian Weiss and Clara Novak one night only. Below it, in smaller letters, Reunion Gala, Songs of Winter and Return. My feet stopped moving before my brain did. 2 photos, side by side. On the left, Adrian in profile, eyes lowered toward an invisible score, jaw set, the familiar concentration carved into his features. On the right, a woman mid-laugh, head slightly thrown back, dark hair pinned up in a way that still managed to look careless. Her eyes were half-lidded, as if listening to a joke only she could hear. I recognized her without ever having seen her before. Clara. The glass door reflected my face faintly over theirs. For a second, it looked like we were all part of the same picture. Then someone walked behind me, and the illusion broke. They finally put it up, a voice said. Passing. The legend returns. I didn't turn to see who it was. I read the line again. One night only. Of course, one night is all you need to dig up an entire past. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the workshop supplier. Delayed delivery on strings. I stared at Adrian's printed profile and felt something inside me tilt. He hadn't mentioned it, Not in the week since the blizzard. Not during the awkward, too careful conversations we'd had when he came by the workshop to check on Clara's piano, and we both pretended that candlelight and almost kisses were just a minor technical difficulty. He had been polite, professional, grateful, distant in all the places that had previously felt warm. I had told myself he needed space, that I needed it too. Apparently he had needed more than that. He had needed her. I didn't confront him. Not that day. Not the next. Instead, I went to the rehearsal the way I always did when he asked me to keep an ear on the piano. It was the safest way I knew to be near him under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by 70 other people, with work between us like a shield. The atmosphere in the hall was different. Usually, rehearsals felt like controlled chaos, players wandering, tuning, joking, Adrian cutting through the noise with sharp gestures and even sharper comments. Today, there was an extra layer of something humming beneath it all. Not quite nerves, not quite excitement, expectation. I wheeled the freshly tuned grand piano into place. It had spent the morning being bullied into cooperation, and I was proud of how it sounded clear, resonant, responsive, a good soldier, ready for battle. The door at the back of the hall opened. Conversation dropped a fraction. I didn't have to look to know who it was. A shift like that doesn't happen for just anyone. Her footsteps were light on the wood as she walked down the aisle, escorted by one of the administrators. She wore a navy coat and a scarf the color of frostbitten rose petals. Her hair was darker than in the poster, swept up into a loose knot. No makeup I could see. She didn't need it. Ms. Novak, someone said. Welcome back. Just Clara, please, she replied, with the easy confidence of someone used to rooms rearranging themselves for her. Her voice carried beautifully even when she was just speaking. I kept my eyes on the piano lid and pretended to check a hinge. Adrian, she called. His name in her mouth sounded like it had been there 1,000 times before. I finally looked up. He was standing on the podium, score in hand. For a brief moment, he looked exactly the way he always did, composed, focused, all sharp angles and intention. Then he saw her. Something shuddered through him, subtle but undeniable, as if someone had reached in and rearranged his internal architecture in a single second. He stepped down from the podium too quickly for his usual measured grace and met her halfway up the aisle. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. The way they looked at each other in that first instant said everything the whole did not hear. Clara, he said. Hi, she said. Simple and soft. She was shorter than him by more than I'd imagined. When she tilted her head to look up at him, it made her seem oddly young, despite the calm assurance in her posture. It's been a long time, he said. She smiled, and the hall warmed a degree. You look exactly the same, liar, he said. But the word was gentle. I watched their exchange through the piano's reflection on the black, polished surface. Two figures, slightly distorted. One conductor, one singer, one past, standing upright and alive in front of me. I told myself it was just curiosity, professional observation, watching two artists reconnect before a concert. It wasn't. It was masochism in high definition. Rehearsal began. If anyone had expected awkwardness, they were disappointed. Once the music started, the years between them collapsed. Clara stood at the front of the stage, score in hand, one foot slightly forward, shoulders relaxed. When she sang, the air changed. Her voice was not perfect in the sterile way recordings sometimes are. It had texture, a slight softness around the edges, but the center of it was clear and steady, like a line of light drawn through fog. When she took a breath, the orchestra seemed to breathe with her. Adrian conducted her the way a good partner leads a dance, not dragging, not overpowering, but aligning every turn of his hand with the way her voice moved. Less here, he said at one point, dropping his volume and bringing his fingers closer together. Make it feel like an echo you're not sure you want to hear. She tried it. He nodded. They smiled at each other with the ease of people who had built this language together. From my place near the piano, I felt like I was watching an old movie with the sound turned up to loud. Between takes, they talked in shorthand. Remember in Prague? She said once. When the critics said this aria was like frostbite, I prefer the one in Budapest who called it emotional hypothermia, he replied. She laughed. Yes, that one was poetic. Their history filled the spaces between measures. The orchestra watched them with a mix of curiosity and respect. The concertmaster made a joke during break about the reunion special. And everyone laughed in that half-gossiping, half-admiring way musicians have when two legends share a stage. No one looked at the piano technician at the side of the room. Good. It would have been unbearable if they had. At the coffee break, I escaped to the backstage corridor, where the walls were painted in unflattering beige and smelled faintly of dust and hand sanitizer. I leaned against the cool plaster and closed my eyes. Breathe in, breathe out. This is not about you, I told myself. You are not the center of this room's gravitational field. You are a satellite. Be small, be functional. Footsteps approached. Are you hiding or just thinking? A voice asked. I opened my eyes. Clara stood there, coffee cup in hand, eyebrows raised. Up close, she was less glossy than in the poster and more human. Her skin bore faint traces of tiredness. The lines around her mouth told me she had laughed often and maybe cried just as much. Both, I said, multitasking. She smiled. It was disarming. You're the piano magician, right? The one who scolds instruments until they behave. I deny all allegations, I said. But yes, I've heard about you, she said. The words landed with a strange weight. From who? From him? She said simply. He talks about how the pianos here finally sound like they forgive us since you arrived. The corridor tilted. He said that? I asked, before I could stop myself. She sipped her coffee, nodded. Adrian doesn't compliment lightly, or often. I took note. I didn't know where to put my hands. They hovered uselessly between my pockets and my sides. I'm Clara, by the way, she said, offering her free hand. I know, I replied, then winced. Sorry, that sounded creepier than I meant. I just mean, your name is on everything. She laughed. It used to be. Less so now. I thought of the scores in the archive. For C? Always. Not really, I said, but kept that thought to myself. Instead, I shook her hand. Hers was warm, fingers calloused in the way singers sometimes are from holding scores, from years of gesturing in rehearsal, from clinging to stands when the nerves threatened to shake them apart. I'm Leah, I said. I fix things for a living. Useful? She said. We break things for a living. There was a silence that might have been awkward if she hadn't seemed so at ease with it. I've been meaning to thank you, she said suddenly. For what? I asked. For the piano, she said. My stomach dropped. The old upright, she clarified. He told me he had found it, that he brought it to someone stubborn enough to fight a losing battle with wood and wire. I almost laughed. It came out wrong. He told you that? I asked, after he sent me a photo, she said, of the piano in your workshop. He wrote, she's in surgery, in good hands. I assumed that she was the instrument, not you. But now that I see you, I'm not so sure. I had the dizzy, absurd urge to step out of my own body and watch this scene from somewhere safer. You knew he brought it here, I said slowly. I asked him to? She said. The hallway narrowed. You, what? She tilted her head, steadying my face with a softness that made me want to both lean into it and push it away. When we spoke a few months ago, she said, he mentioned the piano was still in storage. I told him he should either let it go or save it properly. He said he couldn't bear to watch it be taken apart. I told him, then find someone who can bear it. Someone who understands broken things. Lucky me, I thought. Front row seat to someone else's unfinished chapter. I'm glad he found you, she said. It means he took that step. I swallowed around the sudden tightness in my throat. He still keeps your initials on it, I blurted. Her eyes flickered. On the wood? C+, I said. Carved. He touches it when he talks about the past. Her mouth twisted round a complicated emotion, regret, fondness, guilt, all braided together. We were idiots, she said softly. We thought carving our initials into old furniture would keep us from changing. Did it? I asked. No, she said. But it made it hurt more when we did. Somewhere in the hall, someone called for vocal warm-ups. The sound echoed faintly down the corridor. She glanced towards the stage, then back at me. I don't know what he is to you, she said, or what you are to him. And I'm not asking. She took a breath. But I do know one thing about Adrian. What's that? I asked, even though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted the answer. When he finally lets go of something, she said. He doesn't go back. He may circle it in his mind for years, but once he steps away, He doesn't return to the same place twice. Not really. My heart gave a strange, painful urge. Is that supposed to be comforting? I asked. She smiled, sadly. That depends on where you're standing. She finished her coffee, then dropped the paper cup into a nearby bin. It was nice meeting you, Leah, she said. Thank you for taking care of our ghosts. She left before I could think of a reply. I stood alone in the beige corridor, surrounded by fluorescent light, the faint smell of cleaning fluid, and the sudden, undeniable awareness that I had been trying to live inside someone else's unfinished story, and that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop. That evening, back in the workshop, I didn't go straight to the grand piano I'd been preparing for the concert. I went to the old upright, to Clara's piano, to his piano, to the piano that had become the unwilling third point in whatever constellation this was. The room was quiet, night pressed against the windows. I turned on the small lamp above the workbench, and a pool of light spread toward the instrument, leaving the rest in shadow. I sat down and ran my fingers over the carved initials on the side, C+A. The grooves were smooth now, worn by years of hands, of dusting cloths, of impulse touches. They no longer looked sharp or new, just inevitable. You're right, I said, remembering Clara's words. You were idiots. I rested my forehead briefly against the wood. Then I straightened, opened my notebook, and began to write. Not measurements this time, not humidity levels, not repair schedules, just a single sentence, in my own messy handwriting. I will not stand in the doorway of a house that isn't mine and call the view home. The sentence was dramatic, overwritten, a little ridiculous. I kept it anyway. I tucked the notebook back into my bag, then set my hands on the keys. The piano answered, still a little uneven, still recovering, still stubbornly alive. Don't worry, I murmured. We're just colleagues. You and I. We fix what we can. We accept what we can't. For the first time since the blizzard, I let myself imagine a future that did not orbit around Adrian's gravitational pull. A future where I finished this repair, attended the concert as a technician in the shadows, and then slowly, deliberately, stepped away. Not with a slam of the door, but with the quiet closing of a notebook and the turning of a page. Outside, the winter wind scraped along the building like an old record. Inside, the piano and I kept each other company. Clara had come back. The legend was reuniting. The story everyone wanted was being written on stage. I, for once, chose not to be a character in it. I chose to be the one behind the curtain, already planning the next city, the next workshop, the next unbroken life. Or at least, I told myself I would. Sometimes, deciding to leave is easy. Doing it is where the real work begins. On the night the city celebrated their reunion, I stood just out of the light and quietly planned my escape. English version. The snow had the decency to stop by afternoon. By evening, Vienna was clear and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that made every sound sharper. Car doors slammed in brighter tones, laughter cracked like glass, and footsteps on the pavement echoed with surgical precision. The music therein glowed like a small sun in the middle of it all. Golden light spilled from its windows. People in black coats and dark dresses flowed up the steps in pairs and clusters, drawn toward the promise of warmth, art, and a story they thought they already knew. The conductor, the singer, the night they came back together. Their story had a title. Mine didn't. That felt about right. Backstage was controlled chaos. Technicians shouted over one another. Cables snaked across the floor. Someone cursed in German about a broken stand light. The sharp smell of hairspray mixed with the subtler scent of rosin and metal polish. I arrived early, toolbox in hand, my backstage pass swinging from my neck. Leah, good, the stage manager said, spotting me. She held 3 clipboards and the soul of 10 exhausted people. The Steinway's holding. Yes, it's behaving, I said, but I'll sit with it until it's on stage, just in case it decides to develop an existential crisis. Please don't teach the instruments that phrase, she muttered, already turning to yell something about cue lights. I wheeled the grand piano toward the stage entrance, my hands resting on the cool polished wood. The instrument felt calm, almost smug. It had been tuned 3 times, checked twice, and treated more gently than most human relationships. And like the old upright, this piano carried no carved initials, no confession etched into its body. It would host a legend for one night only, then go back to being just another instrument in the hall. I envied it. Big night, a familiar voice said behind me. I closed my eyes briefly, then turned. Adrian stood there in concert black, white shirt open at the collar, bow tie still tied around his neck. He looked like someone in the middle of becoming the version of himself the world recognized. Apparently, I said. I saw the line outside. Vienna loves a narrative, he said. Reunion sell tickets, so do good programs. I replied, and you chose a very good one. He studied me. There was a new caution in his eyes, as if every word we exchanged now had to pass some internal safety check before it was allowed out. Thank you, he said, for the piano, and for staying. Tonight, I'm here for the instrument, I said lightly. You're just a bonus feature. He huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh. Will you watch? He asked. Or flee once the tuning is done. Backstage, I said. Sidewing. Someone has to make sure you don't trip over your own narrative. His mouth tugged upward, but his gaze flickered briefly toward the corridor leading to the dressing rooms. Clara's warming up, he said, unprompted. She asked about you earlier. I know, I said. We met. He blinked. You did, in the beige corridor, I said. We had coffee and discussed ghosts. A muscle jumped in his jaw. What did she? Relax, I said. She thanked me for the piano, for being stubborn enough to fight with wood and wire. His shoulders eased a fraction. She also said something else, I added. What? That when you leave something, I said. You don't go back. He stilled. For a second, the bustle around us seemed to retreat. She shouldn't speak for me, he said finally, very quietly. Maybe not, I said, but she knows a lot of older versions of you. And the thing about older versions is, they leave stains. Is that what I am to you? He asked, a flicker of something raw in his voice. A stain? No, I said. You're a whole storm system. Stains are easier to wash out. He made a soft sound that was either wounded or amused. Maybe both. Leah, he said. And this time my name in his mouth felt like its own kind of overture. After tonight. Don't, I interrupted gently. Don't make promises when you're about to step into a hall full of people who came to watch you rewrite a love story they already decided the ending of. His eyes searched my face. I'm not rewriting anything, he said. That's the problem. Then conduct, I said. Do your job. Let me do mine. Silence stretched. Will you be here when it's over? He asked. Probably, I said. Pianos are slower to leave than people. He nodded, a small, defeated movement, then slipped away toward the conductor's room. I watched him go, then turned back to the piano and pressed my palm briefly against its lid. At least you know what your purpose is, I murmured. Play when asked. Stay in tune as long as you can. Let others take the bow. The piano didn't argue. The hall filled. From my spot in the side wing, I could see the first few rows of the audience. Fur collars, polished shoes, programs held in gloved hands. The air vibrated with the soft murmur of expectation, the peculiar hum that only exists in a room where several hundred people have all agreed to be quiet at the same time. The house lights dimmed. Applause began as Adrian walked on stage. He bowed. That precise, measured dip of the upper body I had seen dozens of times from this angle. To the audience, it probably looked identical every night. To me, the differences were obvious. He held himself a little stiffer. His left hand, the one that often hung relaxed, twitched once at his side before he stilled it. When he turned toward the orchestra, his gaze flicked briefly to where I stood in the shadows. I pretended not to notice. The first half was orchestral. No Clara yet. Just him and the musicians, in a program built around Winterbritt and Schubert, a new piece by a young composer who looked like he'd been plucked straight from a practice room and dropped into a public contract. He conducted with an intensity that felt different, not heavier, not lighter, just more precise, as if he were afraid to waste a single gesture. During a quiet string passage, I found myself watching his face. His mouth was set, but his eyes looked restless, like they were searching for something the notes couldn't quite locate. In the small gaps between pieces, while the audience coughed and shuffled and rustled their programs, I thought about my own search. My life had become a series of workshops and rehearsal halls, rented rooms, and second-hand furniture. Every time I'd moved, I had told myself it was temporary, a delay, a pause before something real. When had the pauses become the main melody, in my pocket. My phone buzzed once. I didn't look at it. Not yet. Intermission. The lights went up. People poured into the lobby, leaving behind half-finished conversations and theater glasses perched on empty seats. Backstage, the energy shifted. Makeup was touched up. Bow ties were retied. Someone hunted for missing sheet music. The stage manager spoke in increasingly urgent whispers into her headset. I ducked into a quiet corner by a stack of unused chairs and finally checked my phone. An unread email sat at the top of my inbox. Subject: position opening. Workshop technician Prague. I stared at the word Prague until it blurred. I had written that application months ago, on a night when the city had felt particularly small and the future particularly undefined. A workshop in an old conservatory, they'd said. Good instruments, bad heating, reasonable pay. Too many ghosts, probably, but I was used to that. I had almost forgotten about it. I opened the email. We are pleased to inform you. The words swam. I closed my eyes. Adrian had left a version of his life in that city. The idea of stepping into it felt like walking into a house where someone else's music still echoed in the walls. And yet Prague was not just his old story. It could be my new one, if I chose to make it so. In the distance, I heard Clara run through a vocal line, her voice cutting cleanly through the backstage noise before fading again. I put my phone back into my pocket without answering. Not yet. The second half began. Clara walked on stage to a wave of applause that felt different from the one that had greeted Adrian. His applause was respect. Hers was something closer to affection. She smiled. Not broadly, but with that small, grounded warmth that made people want to believe in her before she sang a single note. From my vantage point in the wings, I could see the side of her face, the line of her jaw, the way her hands rested loosely at her sides. Adrian lifted his baton. The first song was about snow. Of course it was. The text spoke of frost on windows, of streets emptied by cold, of a house where only one candle remained lit. Clara's voice wrapped around the words with an intimacy that made them feel less like poetry and more like confession. Adrian shaped the phrases with a tenderness I had rarely seen in rehearsal. His gestures were smaller, his breathing synchronized with hers in a way that suggested this language was once second nature to him. Watching them, it was easy to see what everyone else saw. Two people, perfectly matched. Two halves of the same instrument, finally plugged back into each other. It hurt in a way that surprised me with its freshness. I had expected to feel jealousy. I didn't. What I felt instead was recognition. Whatever they were now, they had been something real once. Something big enough to carve into wood, to write on every score, to drag from city to city like extra luggage. That kind of love doesn't vanish. It morphs. It scars over. It reappears in the smallest muscle under the eye when a familiar phrase returns after years of silence. In the fourth song, Clara turned slightly, just enough that from where I stood, it looked like she was not singing to the audience, or to him, but somewhere in between. In the rest between verses, he looked toward the wings. For a fleeting second, our eyes met. The orchestra inhaled. He didn't. The moment broke. He turned back, gave the cue, and the music surged forward. Later in the cycle, there was a piece about departure. The poem described someone standing in a doorway at dawn, suitcase by their feet, listening to the person behind them breathe in their sleep. The melody rose slowly, then broke open on the word leave. Clara sang it like a woman who had walked through many doors and regretted just enough of them to know what the word really costs. Adrian conducted like a man who had stood on the inside of those doors, watching them close. I stood just outside the light and thought, I am both of them, and neither. The realization was oddly freeing. The encore drew the loudest applause. They hadn't planned for one, or so the program claimed, but of course the audience demanded it. People didn't come to a reunion to leave without one more glimpse of the past. Adrian stepped forward, exchanged a quick look with Clara, and spoke into the hall. For tonight, he said, we thought we'd end with something old. The crowd laughed softly. And something new, he added. He nodded at the orchestra. A hush fell. The piece was unfamiliar, not part of the printed program, not something I recognized from any repertoire list. It began with a quiet string figure, simple, almost hesitant, then unfolded into a melody that felt like someone tentatively opening a window in winter. When Clara began to sing, the text was not in the booklet. Her voice carried lines about returning to a city that had changed, about finding that the river ran in the same direction but the bridges had new names, about realizing that the home you had been mourning was not a place, but a time. It wasn't perfect. There were moments where the orchestra seemed to search for the next phrase, where Clara glanced quickly down at a penciled note in the margin. Adrian, however, looked brighter, not happier, brighter, as if some inner dimmer had been nudged up a notch. He wasn't conducting a memory. He was conducting something half-formed, fragile, still becoming. When the piece ended, there was no explosive applause, just a brief silence, then a swell of sound that felt thoughtful rather than ecstatic. People weren't cheering for nostalgia. They were applauding the risk of attempting something new under the weight of so much old history. From the shadows, I watched Adrian bow with Clara. They shared a glance, brief but genuine. It held no guarantee, no apology, no neatly scripted epilogue, just acknowledgement. We are, we will never again be what we were, but that doesn't erase what we are now. The audience roared again as they left the stage. The hall swallowed them. Backstage, the noise was immediate. Congratulations. Flowers, journalists hovering like well-dressed vultures, administrators glowing with the warm light of sold-out success. I stayed near the piano. I checked the pedals, although they were fine. I wiped down the keys, though no one had touched them with anything but care. It gave my hands something to do besides tremble. Leah, someone said. I looked up. Adrian stood a few feet away, bow tie now properly tied, hair slightly damp at the temples. There was still adrenaline in his eyes, the post-concert vibration that made his movements sharper than usual. You heard it, he said. It wasn't a question. I did, I said. What did you think? He asked. Which part? I said. The reunion, the winter, or the quietly slipped-in world premiere you didn't credit. The last one, he said. It was. I searched for the right word. Brave. He blinked. Brave, he repeated, as if he were tasting the word. To play something new in a night built entirely on the promise of the old, I said. It's like bringing an honest confession to a party where everyone else is wearing costumes. Is that what it sounded like? He asked. Yes, I said. Messy, bare, a little uncertain, alive. Something in his shoulders loosened. I wrote it, he said, after a brief pause. I blinked. You, what? The song, he clarified. The last one. I didn't have time to put my name on the program. Or maybe I just wasn't sure I wanted to see it printed yet. With her, I asked softly. You wrote it for her. I wrote it, he said slowly, with her voice in my ear. But not for her. Not the way I used to mean that. He took a breath. I started it the night of the blizzard, he said. After I hurt you. The fluorescent lights hummed. And the rest? I asked. Came after I saw you with her piano, he said. After I realized I had been treating music like a mausoleum, like a place you go to talk to the dead. And tonight? I asked. What was it tonight? A room with the windows open, he said. At least for a few minutes, we stood there, to people in the aftermath of a storm that wasn't entirely ours. Leah, he said again. My name's softer now. I don't know what you heard tonight, or what you decided, but I need you to know something. Careful, I said, half teasing, half warning. You're about to make a speech backstage. There are witnesses. Let them hear, he said, or let them mishear. I don't care. He stepped closer, not enough to break any unspoken rules of backstage professionalism, but enough that I could smell the faint mix of cologne and sweat and concert dust clinging to him. I am not over everything, he said. I won't pretend I am. That would be insulting to everyone involved. Including yourself, I said. Including myself, he agreed. But I am. Somewhere different than I was the night I said the wrong name. A painful heat rose in my chest. That's a very low bar. I know, he said. I'm trying to climb. He hesitated. When I looked into the wings tonight, he said. I wasn't looking for her. I swallowed. Who were you looking for? You, he said simply. The word landed with terrifying gentleness. In the doorway, I said slowly. Of the house that burned down, maybe, he said. Or maybe in a different house entirely. One I haven't built yet. One I am almost certain I don't deserve to ask you to even visit. My hand tightened on the edge of the piano. Adrian, I said, there's something you should know, too. I took out my phone and held it up. The email still open. Prague, I said. They offered me a position, a workshop job. His face changed. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just all at once. When? He asked. Today, I said. Right before you and your legend walked on stage. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. Are you going to take it? He asked. I wrote the application before I met you, I said. Before the piano, before the storm, before I knew that your ghosts had done an exchange program in that city. That doesn't answer the question, he said. No, I agreed. It doesn't. We looked at each other across the polished black lid of the Steinway. Past and future leaned in on either side of us like impatient relatives. I don't want to be another thing you circle in your mind without ever approaching, I said. And I don't want to live in a city that feels like a rerun of someone else's unfinished chapter. Then don't, he said. His voice shook. Don't go. Stay. Here. The word stay reverberated through me. I stayed once, I said quietly, in a life that didn't fit. I can't do it again just because I'm attached to the way you conduct Schubert. He almost smiled. Almost. What if I came with you? He asked suddenly, the question raw enough that I believed he hadn't rehearsed it. What if, this time, I was the one who left the city and the season and the program before it was finished? That's not you, I said. You don't know who me is anymore, he countered, a touch of fire entering his voice. You're right, I said. I don't. I only know who you were. The man who wrote for C on every score. The man who said her name when he almost kissed someone else. The man who, tonight, wrote a new song and still wasn't sure he wanted to claim it. He flinched. I'm trying, he said. I see that, I replied. And that might be enough. Someday, for someone, not for you, he said. I took a breath that hurt on the way in. It's not that you're not enough, I said. It's that right now, being with you would mean sharing a bed with a whole orchestra of ghosts. And I'm tired, Adrian. I fix broken things all day. I don't want my own life to be another repair project. He looked at me like the floor had shifted under his feet. I don't know how this ends, I said. Maybe I take the job. Maybe I don't. Maybe you write an entire song cycle that has nothing to do with winters you survived and everything to do with springs you haven't had yet. Maybe we meet again in a city neither of us has ever carved our initials into. And until then, he asked. Until then, I said, I think we stand in our own doorways, separately, and decide which way we're walking. The clamor backstage rose, someone calling for Clara, someone else asking where the flowers had gone, a journalist requesting just one more quote. We were running out of time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote something else, he said, a little breathless. Just a few bars on the back of the last song's score. I don't know what it is yet. I only know that when I wrote it, I heard your voice, not hers. He held it out. I didn't take it. Keep it, I said gently. Finish it. See who you are when you no longer need to compare every new note to an old name. His hand lowered. You're really going to go, he said. I don't know, I said, but for the first time in a long time, I'm seriously considering walking towards something that isn't built around someone else's orbit. We stood there a moment longer. He looked like he wanted to say my name again, to anchor himself, to anchor me. He didn't. Congratulations, I said, stepping back from the piano, on your reunion, and your new piece. Both were necessary, I think, Leah, he said. I gave him a small smile that felt like it had been sanded down at the edges. One night only, I said, echoing the poster. Seems fitting. Then I turned away, my toolbox handle cold in my grip, and walked down the corridor toward the loading dock, where the night air leaked in through the cracks and the city waited outside, wide and undecided. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't answer the email yet, but as the echo of Clara's last note and Adrian's final downbeat faded in my ears, I knew this much. If I stayed, I would always be almost his. If I left, there was a chance, just a chance, that one day I could be entirely myself. And for the first time, that possibility sounded louder than any applause. The morning after their standing ovation, my inbox became a battlefield. English version. By the time the sun dragged itself over the Vienna rooftops, the city had already decided that last night was a triumph. I knew this because my phone would not stop buzzing. Reviews, photos, messages from colleagues and acquaintances and people I barely remembered having coffee with once. Screenshots of headlines. They still have it. Weiss and Novak rekindle winter magic. One night only, but worth a lifetime of waiting. A reunion of ghosts and new beginnings. None of them mentioned the piano technician in the wings. Good. That meant I was still invisible enough to leave without making a scene. I lay on my narrow bed in my rented room, staring at the crack on the ceiling from which a small spider had sensibly hung a web. It did not have to decide between cities. It only had to decide where the next fly might pass. My laptop sat on the chair beside the bed, open to the Prague email. We are pleased to inform you. I had read those first 6 words at least 20 times. I hadn't read the rest twice in a row yet. Every time I got to "We would be honored to welcome you," my chest tightened, and I had to walk away. To the sink, to the window, to the kettle, to any object that did not talk back. I should have been excited. Prague was not a myth to me. It was a real city with crooked streets and cheap coffee and rehearsal rooms precisely like the one I already lived in. Just arranged differently. It was an offer, a door, a line of music that did not resolve into a cadence I already knew. Instead, all I could think was, that's where he left a version of himself behind. Is it foolish or poetic to follow him there after I've finally decided not to follow him here? My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I swung my legs off the bed and sat there for a moment, listening to the radiator hiss. My body felt heavy, not with fatigue, but with indecision. Like every limb contained 3 conflicting choices. On my nightstand, my notebook lay open to yesterday's sentence. I will not stand in the doorway of a house that isn't mine and call the view home. In the harsh light of morning, it looked even more dramatic than it had the night before. I picked up the pen anyway and wrote beneath it. But what if there is no house yet? Only open roads and other people's weather. I underlined no house twice. Then I closed the notebook. Because if I kept going, I was going to end up writing an entire opera in passive-aggressive metaphors. The workshop was colder than usual. The heating system, offended by last night's neglect, had decided to sulk. My breath fogged faintly when I stepped inside. The old upright sat in its corner, silent and patient. The Steinway was still at the hall, basking in post-concert praise. I shrugged off my coat, pulled on my work apron, and did what I always did when my mind threatened to fracture. Inventory. Check the glue. Check the clamps. Check the strings. Check that the world had not physically cracked along with me. Good morning, I told the upright. It did not answer, but the room felt less empty once I said it. I meant to spend the morning on another instrument, entirely a battered practice piano whose owner had written the words "sorry" and "kids" in the email in a way that suggested it had survived several wars. My hands, however, went to the old upright first, to C plus a dot to the carved initials that had quietly orchestrated my last few weeks. I traced them with my fingertip and felt something shift. Not break, not heal, just move slightly out of the position it had been stuck in. You don't get to decide for me, I told the wood softly. Not anymore. My phone vibrated on the workbench. I glanced at it. A message from an unknown number, preceded by an Austrian country code. This is ridiculous, I thought. It could be anyone. Delivery. Wrong number. Survey. I opened it. Unknown. I don't know how to say this without sounding like a cliché, but thank you for last night. I stared at the single initial. Adrian had my number. In theory, he'd asked for it the night the workshop flooded and he needed to warn me about a leak. He had never used it. Now, he had. I typed, "You're welcome." The piano behaved. I erased it. I typed, "You're welcome." The music was something. I erased that too. I settled on, "You're welcome." I hit send. The 3 dots appeared briefly, then vanished. No reply. The emptiness where a reply could have been felt worse than silence. I tossed the phone back on the bench and forced myself to focus on the practice piano's cracked bridge. Wood. Glue. Pressure. These were things I understood. They followed rules. They betrayed you slowly, visibly. People, less so. Round noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any clients. Deliveries usually just appeared, accompanied by a disembodied shout of my name through the stairwell. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Clara stood there, holding a paper bag and an expression somewhere between tired and serene. "Hi," she said. "I brought Birchen. Is it too early to say goodbye?" I blinked. "Depends on who you're leaving," I said. "Come in." She stepped inside, glancing around the workshop with open curiosity. It's colder than the hall, she said. The instruments mutinied, I said. They're demanding better working conditions. She smiled and handed me the bag. It was warm and smelled like freshly baked bread. My stomach, which had apparently decided emotional turmoil did not cancel hunger, growled. I didn't eat much yesterday, she said. Adrenaline, nerves, old ghosts. Thought I'd make up for it today and bring some for whoever keeps the ghosts in tune. We sat on stools by the workbench, legs not quite touching. She tore a piece of bread in half and handed it to me. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said. Without preamble. Vienna? I asked. Yes, she said. Berlin first, then, who knows? Agents have plans. I have a tolerance for train schedules. Everyone thinks you're staying, I said. Everyone likes the idea of stories circling back to where they started, she said. But if they do, it's rarely on the same track, and almost never at the same time. I took a bite of bread. It was still warm, the crust crackling lightly. So you and he, I began, then stopped, because the sentence had too many possible endings. Did not spontaneously unravel years of complicated history in one rehearsal cycle. She finished for me. No. Closure? I asked. Something like that, she said. We sang. We argued about phrasing. We remembered why we worked and why we didn't. We acknowledged. The scar, I repeated. Where something used to be, she said. Not the wound itself. That's gone. Mostly. There was a quiet in her voice that felt heavier than drama. He loves you, I said before I could stop myself. She didn't flinch. In a way, she said. In many ways, some of which are no longer good for him, or me, or anyone who happens to orbit too close. I stared at the workbench. I think, she added, that he is also beginning to love something that isn't me, or someone. My heart stumbled. Music, I said quickly. She laughed softly. Always. But that's not what I meant. I said nothing. She glanced toward the upright, as if sensing where my thoughts wanted to flee. He told me about you, she said. Panic flared. In what sense? Don't worry, she said. He didn't hand me a list of your faults. He just mentioned the way you talk to instruments, the way you listen, the way you called him out on treating music like a mausoleum. I exhaled, slowly. He said he hurt you, she added. That he did not need to say, I muttered. It was fairly obvious. Yes, she said. He's talented in many things. Subtlety is not always one of them. We shared a brief, reluctant smile. I told him, she went on, that he needed to decide whether he wanted to live in the museum of his old life or build a new room somewhere with more windows. And, I asked, and he said he didn't know how, she replied. I told him that not knowing is not an excuse, only a starting point. She studied me then, more closely. What do you want, Leah? She asked. Honestly, not in relation to him, in relation to yourself. The question sat between us like another loaf of bread, too hot to touch immediately. I don't know, I said, reflexively. She raised one eyebrow. Fine, I amended. I know pieces. I know I want to work with instruments until I'm old enough that my hands shake and someone else has to fix what I broke. I know I want a room with a window that faces something green. I know I want fewer ghosts. And Prague, she asked, the word thudded in my chest. You know about that, I said. He looked like someone had pushed him off a cliff when you told him, she said calmly. I guessed it wasn't just a weekend trip. I applied before I met him, I said, before I knew any of this existed. Then the question is simple, she said. Is it? I asked, because it doesn't feel simple. She shrugged gently. Simple rarely means easy. Do you want to go? Yes, I said, before doubt could catch the word. And no, and yes again. Louder. Good, she said. Take the loudest answer. I stared at her. Aren't you supposed to say something different? I asked, like, give him time. Or don't make rash decisions after emotional nights. Or true love deserves a second chance. That sounds like something a critic would write, she said dryly. I am many things. I am not a critic. She finished her bread, dusted crumbs from her fingers, and stood. For what it's worth, she said. You are not his rebound, and you are not my replacement. If you choose to stay, let it be because you want to hear Not because you feel responsible for shepherding him out of a history he built long before you existed. I swallowed. And if I go? I asked. Then go completely, she said. Don't haunt yourself with what-ifs. Choose your city. Let him choose his. If your paths cross again, let it be as to people who walked their own roads, not as halves of a puzzle trying to fit into a picture that was never printed. She moved toward the door, then paused. For the record, she said, glancing back, I like the way he says your name. Heat rushed to my face. He says it like an apology. I muttered. No, she said softly. He says it like a possibility he's afraid to break. She opened the door. Goodbye, Leah, she said. Thank you for saving our piano from a second death. Goodbye, Clara, I said. Thank you for giving it a first life. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The workshop felt different, not emptier, just rearranged. After she left, the afternoon stretched long and pale. I tried to work. The practice piano glared at me with missing ivories. The upright watched silently, its strings glinting in the low light. My phone stayed quiet. Adrian, apparently, had decided that one text was enough for the day. I was grateful and unreasonably disappointed. By 4 o'clock, my concentration had completely evaporated. I wiped my hands, locked the workshop, and walked without fully deciding to. My feet took me along streets I knew too well, past cafes where musicians argued over tempos, past a park where a child played an unrecognizable melody on a recorder with heroic seriousness. I ended up by the river. The water was dark, slow, flecked with leftover ice where the sun couldn't reach. Bridges loomed above, connecting districts and lives with simple stone. I leaned against the railing and took out my phone. The Prague email still waited, patient and unread since morning. I opened it again. We would be honored to welcome you for a trial period of 6 months. With the possibility of extension, 6 months. A season. The length of a program, almost. Behind that email, buried under other notifications, sat another message. From Adrian. I hadn't seen it arrive. Adrian, I won't ask you not to go. I don't have that right. But if you do go, and if you ever find yourself in a hall where the acoustics are terrible, the instruments complain, send me the name. I'll avoid conducting there. That was a joke. Mostly, I exhaled, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Another message appeared below it. Send a few minutes later. Adrian, I am trying to learn how to want something that begins, not just something that returns. You don't have to stay to prove that I can, but I hope you will. Wine brushed my face, sharp and clean. I could have stayed. I could have written, I'll stay. We'll figure it out. We'll build something between concerts and ghosts and old carved letters. I could have told myself that love is, by definition, complicated. That all relationships begin with someone's past pressed like a second skin between them. But I thought of the notebook, of the sentence underlined twice, of Clara's voice, calm and clear, take the loudest answer. My loudest answer was not stay. It was leave, before you start folding yourself into the shape of someone else's unfinished symphony. My fingers moved. To my surprise, they did not tremble. I opened a new email to Prague. Dear Sir or Madam, thank you for your offer. I would be happy to accept. I wrote it cleanly, without hedging. I did not apologize for the delay. I did not mention Vienna, or hall acoustics, or men who wrote songs in minor keys. When I finished, I read it once. Then I hit send. The little whoosh felt absurdly small for what it carried. The world did not change. Cars still passed over the bridge. A cyclist swore as he hit a bump in the path. Somewhere, someone's dog insisted on sniffing every patch of frozen grass. Inside my chest, however, something realigned. For the first time in a long time, my next 6 months belonged to a decision I had made before anyone else's story entered the frame, and I had chosen to honor that version of myself, instead of sacrificing her at the altar of a more dramatic narrative. I typed one more message, this time to Adrian. Me. I accepted. Prague. 6 months, maybe longer. Don't avoid the city on my account. That was a joke. Mostly, I hovered over the screen for a second, then added, thank you for the music, and for showing me what I don't want to repeat. I sent it before I could soften it. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Adrian, then I hope Prague knows how lucky it is. I'm not going to say goodbye. It sounds too much like an ending. So until the next haul. Tears burned behind my eyes, but they did not fall. Until the next haul. I repeated, quietly. Not until I come after you. Not until you change your mind. Just a simple acknowledgement that our paths might cross again. Not because fate demanded it, but because the world of music is small and we were both stubborn enough to keep walking. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and watched the river. The water didn't care. It had one job: move forward. I decided to try and learn from it. That night, I went back to the workshop. The radiator had finally decided to cooperate. The air was marginally less hostile. I turned on the lamp over the old upright and sat down. My hands hovered over the keys, then settled. I played something I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was a fragment of the new song from last night, but the intervals were different. Less symmetrical, more hesitant and curious, like a question that didn't know yet if it wanted to be answered. As the notes unfurled, I realized with a strange jolt, I was playing my own melody. Small, uneven, uncertain, but mine. When I finished, I pressed my palm one last time over C+. Thank you for the warning, I whispered, and the reminder that love can exist even if it doesn't in the way the audience wants. Then I picked up my pen and opened the notebook to a fresh page. This time, I wrote, I choose my own doorway, even if it opens onto a street I've never walked. The sentence looked less like an opera and more like a beginning. For the first time, the thought of leaving didn't feel like running away from him. It felt like walking toward myself. The day I left Vienna, the sky was the clearest it had been in weeks. It felt offensive. English version. The city looked almost kind that morning. Blue sky, no snow, sunlight pooling on the cobblestones like a promise it didn't intend to keep. Tourists pulled their scarves down for photos. A street violinist outside the bakery was playing something cheerful and out of tune. It was the sort of day you're supposed to fall in love with a place. I was leaving it. My suitcase sat by the door of my rented room, zipper stubbornly closed over a life that fit into too few objects: clothes, tools, a half-molten candle, my notebook, a folded map of Prague that I had pretended not to be excited about. I moved through the room one last time, performing the ritual of departure. Check the drawers, check under the bed, check the bathroom for forgotten shampoo and ghosts. My workshop key sat in my palm, cold and sharp. I was supposed to drop it off later with the building manager, along with an envelope of invoices and a note that said, "Thank you for trusting me with your instruments. Please contact me by email for any follow-up questions regarding pending repairs." It sounded so tidy on paper. Inside my chest, nothing was tidy. My phone lay on the table, face down. No new messages. Adrian had not written again. Of course he hadn't. The last word between us had been until, open-ended, hovering, unfinished. Maybe that was better than goodbye. Maybe it was worse. I picked up my notebook instead. The last page held my newest sentence. I choose my own doorway, even if it opens onto a street I've never walked. Underneath, I added, almost as an afterthought, and if I get lost, at least those wrong turns will be mine. The words steadied me more than any reply from him could have. The workshop was half empty when I arrived. I had spent the past week returning instruments, extending deadlines, and scribbling detailed instructions on blue tape stuck to pianos I wouldn't be there to fix. Check bass strings for rust here. Regulation half finished. Measure hammer line before proceeding. Soundboard crack stable for now. Monitor humidity. The old upright sat where it always had, against the far wall, shoulders squared like an old soldier at attention. C+. Watched me approach. Last day, I told it. The piano said nothing, as usual, but I could almost feel it judging me for the way I was about to leave before the story felt finished. "Don't look at me like that," I muttered. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm delegating." I had already written a letter to the technician who would take over the workshop. "There is an old upright in the corner that looks worse than it is. Please be kind to it. Its past is heavier than its parts. The initials on the side are not a fault that needs sanding away. They're part of the structure. Treat them as such." I had not signed that part. It felt too much like confession. On the workbench, my tools were laid out in an almost ceremonial row, ready to be packed. I slipped each one into its designated slot in the canvas roll. Screwdrivers, pliers, tuning hammer, mutes, felt wedges. I paused on the tuning fork. It had a small dent near the base from being dropped years ago. It still rang true. Some things did. I was closing the last strap on the tool roll when I heard it. A faint scrape at the workshop door. A soft thud. I opened it. The hallway was empty. On the floor, someone had slid an envelope under the door. No name on the front. Just a smudge where fingers had pressed. My heart knew before my hands did. Inside was a single sheet of manuscript paper, folded twice. I unfolded it. 4 bars. Just 4. A line of melody, written in his sharp, precise hand. Not quite a theme. Not yet. Just the beginning of one rising. Hesitating, dropping a half step, then climbing again as if it had changed its mind midair. At the top of the page, in small letters, he had written Opus. Below that, crossed out so thoroughly that I almost missed it. Poor Al. The ink there was slightly smudged, as if someone's thumb had tried to erase more than just the letters. I sank onto the nearest stool. Of course he hadn't signed it. Of course he hadn't knocked. Of course he had waited until the morning I was leaving to slip this under my door like a guilty child returning a borrowed toy. I held the paper up to the light. The notes looked unfinished. Not in the sense of being sloppy, but in the sense that they were clearly the front door to a house that did not yet exist. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to march straight to his apartment and hand it back. Instead, I folded it along the original creases and tucked it between the pages of my notebook. Too late. I said out loud, though he wasn't there to hear it. Not for the music, for the timing. The upright watched. Impassive. You understand, I told it. He's learning to write something that begins. But I need to go learn how to live something that doesn't end with him. I stood, placed my hand on C+, a one last time, and let it go. The train station smelled like coffee, metal, and unresolved emotions. People hurried in packs, dragging suitcases and children. A departure board flickered overhead, letters flipping with an old mechanical clatter. Prague, GL, NEDR, 13:05 on time. I found my platform and set my suitcase down near a pillar. From here, I could see the city stretching away, the spire of the cathedral, the dome of the hall, the golden blur of the district where the workshop lived. My phone remained stubbornly silent. I told myself I was relieved. Leah? The voice came from my left. I turned to quickly, but it wasn't him. It was Jonas, one of the younger violinists from the orchestra, hair sticking out from under a beanie, violin case slung over one shoulder. You're really going, he said, a little breathless, as if he'd run to catch me. They said you were, but you know how people talk. Apparently I am, I said, unless this train decides it prefers melodrama to punctuality. They never do, he said. They're very Austrian about time. He hesitated. I just wanted to say, he added, that we'll miss you. The violas were talking about holding a small, tasteful mutiny if you left, but they're too disorganized. That sounds accurate, I said, smiling despite myself. He shifted his weight, looking suddenly awkward. And, he said, for what it's worth. He looked awful this morning. Who? I asked, because some habits die hard. He gave me a look. Right, I said. Of course, he came in early, Jonas said. Ran a rehearsal for next week's program like the hall was on fire. We all pretended not to notice, and then talked about it anyway. That's what musicians do, I said. Play, pretend, gossip. Yeah, he said. Also, he kept checking his phone between movements. I've never seen him do that. My pulse flickered. Maybe he's waiting for a review, I said lightly. Maybe, Jonas said. His expression said he didn't believe that any more than I did. The announcement for my train crackled overhead. Anyway, he said quickly, I just wanted to say good luck. In Prague, don't let them give you terrible instruments. And if they do, scare them into behaving. The instruments, I mean, you can't scare Czechs. They survived history. I'll take notes, I said. He stepped forward and hugged me briefly, in the brusque, shy way of someone who prefers music to words. Also, he added, stepping back, if you ever decide to come back, don't wait for permission. From who? I asked. From anyone, he said, including yourself. Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowds. I stood there, feeling the echo of his words in places I didn't know were hollow. The train slid into the station with a long, metallic sigh. I got on. The seat by the window was already occupied by a coat. Its presumed owner arrived a moment later, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an expression of mild chaos, juggling a stack of folders and a thermos that smelled strongly of peppermint tea. "Pardon," she said in German. "I am always carrying too much." "It looks like you're carrying exactly what you need," I replied. She smiled and crammed her folders into the overhead rack with the precise violence of someone who had done this too often. "Prague?" she asked, settling into the seat. "Yes," I said. "First time?" she asked. "First time living there," I said. "I've played tourist for a weekend. It rained the whole time." "Then the city still has secrets for you," she said. "Good. It gets bored when people think they've already seen it." She extended her hand. "I'm Hannah," she said. "I teach at the conservatory. Or tried to. They are very talented at ignoring instructions." "Leah," I said, shaking her hand. "I fix the instruments they ignore." Her eyes lit up. She said. "You're the new technician." The word new hit my ears like a small bell. "You know about the workshop?" I asked. "I live in it," she said wryly. "Metaphorically. Sometimes literally, when rehearsals go too late." The director has been muttering for weeks about finally finding someone stubborn enough to argue with the pianos instead of the professors. I laughed, startled. "That's very specific," I said. "Specificity is how we survive academia," she said. "Welcome in advance. We desperately need you." Half our practice rooms sound like someone trapped a cat inside a cupboard of forks. The train lurched into motion. Vienna began to slide away outside the window, buildings receding, tracks unspooling, the hall shrinking into a memory-sized shape. I watched until it blurred, then turned back to Hannah. "What do you teach?" I asked. "Piano," she said. "Badly, according to some of my students, but they say that about everyone over 30. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough to see 3 generations of prodigies burn out and come back humbled," she said. "And you? How long do they have you?" 6 months, I said. "For now, 6 months is a good unit of time," she said. "Long enough to make mistakes, short enough to convince yourself you can always leave if you hate it." "I used to think everything was temporary," I said. "Now I'm not sure if that makes me brave or just slippery." "Slippery can be useful," she said. "It keeps you from sticking to places that don't fit." I thought of Vienna, of the hall, of the workshop, and the old upright, and the man who had slipped music under my door instead of showing up at the station. "Does Prague fit?" I asked. "Some days," she said. "Some days it doesn't, but it's honest about it. It doesn't pretend to be what it's not. That helps." She tilted her head, studying me. "Are you running toward something or away from something?" she asked. "Both," I said. "Is that allowed?" "Of course," she said. "Just remember to keep track of which is which, so you don't accidentally run in circles." I glanced down at my notebook, where the folded manuscript page rested between the covers. Not a circle, I thought. A spiral, close enough to look similar, but not the same. Outside, fields unrolled under a pale winter sky. Inside, I felt, for the first time since the blizzard, like I was not just reacting to events, but moving toward a place I had chosen before any of this began. Prague greeted me with cold air and trams that rang their bells at pedestrians like impatient teachers. The station was crowded, but less polished than Vienna's. Paint peeled here and there. Signs leaned slightly off-center. The whole place felt beautifully, unapologetically used. Hannah led the way through the maze of tracks, talking the entire time. "This tram. Then a short walk," she said. "The conservatory is old. You will hear it before you see it. Too many scales being practiced badly." She was right. By the time we turned the last corner, a mishmash of sounds floated out of open windows, violin arpeggios, someone belting a musical theater song in Czech, a trumpet attempting high notes and almost making them. The building itself was pale and slightly crumbling, with a courtyard that seemed to have been designed for dramatic arguments and secret cigarettes. I loved it instantly. The workshop was at the back, down a narrow corridor that smelled of rosin and dust. The door stuck, then yielded under Hannah's practice shove. "Home," she said, gesturing inside, "or laboratory, or battlefield, depends on the day." The room was smaller than the one in Vienna, cluttered with parts and tools, and to pianos in various stages of indignity. Light poured in from a high window, illuminating dust motes like tiny, aimless planets. A man in his 60s looked up from a disassembled action on the bench. His hair was white, his hands steady. He wore an expression of permanent skepticism. "This is her," Hen announced. "The one from Vienna, the one who talks to pianos. Be nice," he grunted, which I decided to interpret as a welcome. "I'm Carol," he said. "Until last week, I was the entire department." "I'm Leah," I said. "I'm here to ruin your monopoly." "Good," he said. "It was overrated." He jerked his chin toward the larger of the two pianos. "This one has been threatening to fall apart for 3 years," he said. "We pretend not to notice. Maybe you can convince it to postpone its suicide." I approached the instrument, running my fingers lightly along the cracked fallboard. It felt different from Vienna, less refined, more blunt. "I'll see what I can do," I said. As my hand settled on the wood, that now familiar feeling moved through me, the quiet click of connection, the sense that beneath all the noise and history and other people's expectations, there was something simple I could still trust. Wood, glue, pressure, sound. I belonged to those things long before I met him. I would belong to them long after this story's applause faded. "Tomorrow," Carol said. "Today. You meet paperwork. The director loves paperwork. She thinks it keeps us from destroying the building. I've seen worse systems fail at that," I said. Hannah laughed. "Come," she said. "I'll show you where the coffee is. It is important to introduce you to the true heart of the institution on your first day." As we stepped back into the corridor, my phone buzzed. For a second, my heart leapt in the old direction. It was an automated message from the railway company, thanking me for choosing to travel with them. I exhaled, half disappointed, half relieved. Adrian did not need to be in Prague for me to be fully here. That was the point. Still, that night, in the small room the conservatory had arranged for me above the workshop, I unpacked carefully, clothes into drawers, tools onto shelves, notebook on the nightstand, the folded manuscript page I taped discreetly to the inside of the wardrobe door, not as a shrine, as a reminder of music that begins, of timing that doesn't always align, of a love that was real, even if I chose not to stand in it. I stepped back and looked at it. The 4 bars stared back, unfinished and waiting. "Finish it," I whispered, as if he could hear me across countries. "But don't write my name on it. Write yours." I closed the wardrobe. Then I opened the window. Prague's night air slid in colder than Vienna's, carrying tram bells, and the distant laugh of students who didn't know they were in someone else's dream city. I leaned on the sill and let the unfamiliar skyline fill my eyes. For the first time, when I pictured Adrian, he was not the center of the frame. He was there, yes, somewhere, in some hall, arguing with a score and making musicians miserable in pursuit of beauty. But he was part of the background now, not the main melody. The main melody was this: a room above a workshop, a city that did not yet know my name, a life that, for the first time, might be scored in my key. I did not know yet if this story would stay in Prague or move again. I did know this: I had left the house that wasn't mine, and I had walked, trembling and stubborn, through a door I chose. Whatever came next, even if someday he turned up here, realizing too late what he wanted, I would meet it on my feet, not on my knees. The night he finally chose me, I had already chosen something else. English version. By the time spring found Prague, I had a favorite tram, a favorite cracked mug in the workshop, and a favorite way of pretending my past was just a different tuning system. Life had become noisy in a good way. Students arguing about fingerings in the hallway, Hannah shouting at a metronome, Carol muttering at a stubborn screw that refused to turn. My days were measured in half steps and coffee breaks. My nights were quieter, but not empty. Sometimes I would sit on the narrow windowsill of my little room above the workshop and listen to the city breathe, tram bells, footsteps, distant laughter. Sometimes there was another sound, a cello. Marek lived a floors below. He was one of Hannah's former students, tall, quieter than his instrument, with a way of listening that made silence feel less like absence and more like space. He practiced late. At first, the sound annoyed me. The walls were thin, and my days were long. Then I realized he was practicing the same Bach suite I used to listen to in Vienna when I couldn't sleep. One night, after a particularly awful battle with a cracked pin block, I knocked on his door with a mug of tea in hand. "You keep rushing in the saraband," I said. When he opened, He blinked. Hello, I said. Leah, new technician. Your neighbor. Professional listener. He looked embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't realize it was that loud. It's not the volume, I said. It's the tempo. Bach is forgiving. My ceiling less so. He laughed then, a surprised, bright sound. Come in, he said. Tell me where I'm rushing. I did. He started leaving a second mug on his table whenever he practiced after that. Not always. Not with expectation. Just in case. We didn't talk about Vienna. We didn't talk about conductors. We talked about strings and weather and the way Prague's light was different in the mornings than at night. It was not a love story. Not yet. It was a life story, which, for the first time in a long time, felt like enough. The poster appeared on a Wednesday. I wasn't looking for it. I was on my way back from a hardware store, a roll of sandpaper under one arm, my mind busy with the problem of a particularly opinionated damper. The wind caught the corner of a fresh sheet of paper taped to a stone wall by the tram stop and flipped it just enough for the name to catch my eye. Adrian Weisbrake Philharmonic. Guest conductor on night on below that, in smaller print, including the world premiere of a new song cycle. My hands went cold on the sandpaper. For a moment, the street fell away. The tram, the people, the chatter, they blurred into background noise. Of course, I said out loud, to nobody. Of course the universe has a sense of humor. Ah, someone beside me said. Him. I turned. Hannah stood there, holding two bags of sheet music and an expression that said she had expected this sooner or later. You know him? She asked, though her eyes already held the answer. I know his rehearsal face, I said, and his terrible coffee habits, and his tendency to conduct like the downbeat is a moral question. So yes, she said. So yes, I echoed. She studied the poster. He's good, she said. Annoying, but good. The orchestra has been fussing about this guest spot for weeks. Apparently, he has a reputation for making people cry in rehearsal. Sounds familiar, I said. The students are all going, she added. The hall gave us a block of tickets. You should come. No, I said. Too quickly. Absolutely not. Professional curiosity, she suggested. Personal hazard, I replied. She tilted her head. Let me try a different argument, she said. You work with sound. He's bringing something new. Don't let your history with the carrier stop you from hearing the message. That's a very poetic way of asking me to watch my ex almost lover conduct his midlife crisis, I said. She smiled slightly. That's a very dramatic way of describing a concert. I stared at the poster, at his name, at the words one night only. Once, that phrase had meant danger. Now, it felt like boundary. Fine, I said finally. I'll sit in the back, high up, where the oxygen is thin and my judgment can't be heard over the strings. Good, she said. I'll bring tissues. For me. Not for you. I expect you to be stoic. I didn't answer. Inside, something old and raw was shifting, not reopening, just turning to face the door it used to lean against. The hall in Prague was smaller than Vienna's, but it had better manners. It didn't try to dazzle. It just held sound the way cupped hands hold water carefully, with a little spill at the edges. Hannah and I sat near the back of the balcony, as promised. From here, I could see the entire stage and almost none of his face. Good. The program was ambitious. The first half was all orchestra. Bartok, a contemporary Czech piece that sounded like a city arguing with itself, a quiet, painful adagio that made even the man who had been coughing since we sat down go still. He conducted like a man who had stopped pretending not to feel things. His gestures were less clean than in Vienna, less perfect, but they were alive. If Vienna had been about control, this was about surrender. Once, during a slow passage, he lifted his head just enough that I could see his profile. The years between us crowded into that angle. He looked older, not in a cruel way, just more fully drawn. I felt no surge of possessive love, no punch of jealousy, just a complicated ache, threaded with something like respect. At intermission, Hannah nudged me. Still alive? She asked. Debatable, I said. Ask me after the new piece. She squeezed my hand. The second half began with a hush. No one coughed now. The program note described the new cycle in vague, reverent terms, exploration of transition, urban solitude, the spaces between leaving and arriving. I almost laughed. Of course, Clara did not walk on stage. The soloist was someone else entirely, a baritone with kind eyes and a voice like darkwood. No drama, no tabloid history, just a man ready to carry an unfamiliar line. Adrian lifted his hands. The first notes were for strings only. Quiet, tentative. 4 bars. My 4 bars. Not identical. He had changed the intervals, shifted the rhythm, but the contour was there. The little half-step drop. The hesitant climb. My throat closed. He hadn't stolen it. He had grown it. The cycle unfolded like a map of the last year of my life, written by someone who had been watching from a distance. A city that wasn't home yet. A train station where no one was saying goodbye properly. A workshop where ghosts were loud at night and quiet in the morning. And always, in the accompaniment, that 4-bar figure returning not as obsession, but as a motif. A door, opening and closing in different keys. At one point, the poem spoke of a woman standing at a window in a city that did not yet know her name. The baritone sang it simply, without theatrics. My eyes burned. Somewhere below, he stood with his back to me, arms moving, drawing sound out of the orchestra like thread from a tangled spool. I felt, suddenly and with terrible clarity, that this was his confession. Not the flowers he hadn't sent. Not the apologies he had texted. Not the piece of paper he'd left under my door. This, a room full of strangers, listening to a story they thought was about themselves, never knowing that somewhere in the balcony sat the person he had failed and was trying, clumsily and beautifully, to honor. When the final note faded, the silence broke like glass. Applause crashed over the stage. The baritone bowed. The orchestra stood. He turned to face the hall. For a second, his eyes swept the balcony. They didn't find me. That felt right. I stayed until the applause thinned, then slipped out before the lights fully rose. Hannah didn't follow. She knew this part of the story wasn't hers to witness. He found me the next day in the workshop. I was elbow deep in the stubborn Prague piano Carol had announced would commit suicide Sunday. My hair was pulled back. There was graphite on my fingers and probably my face. The door opened. I didn't look up. Carol, I said, if that's you, I told you, the bass bridge isn't going to wait politely until budget season. It's not, Carol, he said. My heart lurched. I kept my eyes on the strings for one more beat, then straightened slowly. He stood in the doorway, in a dark coat that didn't belong to this building, with the city's wind still clinging to his hair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked tired, in the way people do when they've been awake too much inside their own minds. Hello, I said, because it was the only word that felt safe. Hello, he replied. His gaze traveled over the workshop, the tools, the parts, the piano in pieces, and something in his shoulders eased. It suits you, he said softly. What does? I asked. This, he said. The mess. The order inside the mess. The light. I shrugged. I like places where things can be repaired, I said. Or at least where their brokenness is honest. He flinched. Just barely. I didn't know if you were there last night, he said. In the hall. I was, I said. He swallowed. Did you hear it? He asked. The tuning? I said. Yes, the cello could have. He shook his head. You know what I mean. I paused. Yes, I said. I heard it. And, he asked, almost whispering, and it was beautiful. I said. Painful. Honest. I'm glad you wrote it. He exhaled, shakily. It's yours, he said. No, I said. Firmly. It's yours. That's the point. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I came here, he said, for the tour. Officially. And unofficially, I asked. Unofficially, he said. I came because for the past months, every hall I walked into felt slightly wrong, like a room where someone had moved the piano to centimeters to the left and refused to admit it. And every time I tried to fix it, I realized I was rearranging things round an absence I refused to look at. Very poetic, I said. Hannah would approve. Leah, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I know, I replied. No, he said. Not just for that night. For all of it. For pulling you into a house that was still burning. For asking you to hold doors I hadn't closed. For wanting you and still hanging my heart on a name that wasn't yours. The words might have gutted me months ago. Now, they landed differently. They hurt. Of course they did. But they did not knock me off my feet. I appreciated the song more than the apology, I said. But I'll take both. He almost smiled, then didn't. I love you, he said. The sentence fell between us like a key no longer attached to a door. I didn't respond. He swallowed. I loved you then, he said. Stupidly, inconsistently, selfishly. I didn't know how to name it without comparing it to what I had before. That was my failure, not yours. And now, I asked, now I know the difference between nostalgia and love, he said. Between needing to prove I can fix the past and wanting to build something in the present. He took a breath that seemed to cost him. I don't want you as a second act, he said, or as redemption. I want you as you, whatever that means, however messy, however long it takes. I'm not asking you to come back to Vienna. I'm not asking you to follow me anywhere. I will move. I will come here. Or anywhere you are, if that's what it takes. I will show up at your ridiculous workshop and make coffee that offends your taste and learn how to live in a city that doesn't care how many encores I've had. He laughed once, harshly. I know I don't deserve a second chance, he said. No amount of music can buy it, but I had to stand here in front of you and finally choose you in a language that isn't just notation. He fell silent. The workshop hummed around us. Down the hall, someone played scales badly. A tram clanged outside. Dust hung in the air like tiny, suspended decisions. I looked at him, at the man who had been a storm system in my life, at the composer of four tentative bars that had grown into something vast, at the boy in Vienna who had carved initials into someone else's piano, and then learned, much too late, what it cost. I loved him. That hadn't vanished, but the love had changed shape. I believe you, I said quietly. He blinked. I believe that you love me, I said, and that you finally understand what that means for you. I believe that Claro is no longer the room you live in, just a photograph on a shelf. I believe that if I said yes now, you would show up in ways you couldn't have imagined a year ago. Hope flickered in his eyes. Then, and, I said gently, I'm still going to say no. The hope shattered, but he didn't look away. Why? He asked, not accusing, just bewildered. Because I'm not the same woman who stood in that backstage corridor in Vienna, I said. Back then, I would have forgiven you almost anything for the chance to be chosen. Now, I've learned how to choose myself. I gestured around the workshop. This place, I said. These students, Carol cursing in 3 languages, Hannah making me listen to bad Chopin, Marek playing cello badly at midnight, and then better at 1 in the morning. This life, I built it from a decision I made before you ever texted me, before you ever slipped music under my door. I took a breath. If I said yes now, it would feel like erasing the version of me who got on that train even though she knew you might change your mind someday, I said. It would feel like telling her she was wrong to leave a house that was burning. He closed his eyes briefly. I don't want to punish you, I added. This isn't revenge. It's protection. For me. And maybe for you. If we tried now, we'd spend the first year proving to ourselves that we weren't replaying the same patterns. I'm tired, Adrian. I fix broken things all day. I won't make my heart another restoration project. He opened his eyes. There were tears there. Angst. Is there someone else? He asked. After a moment, I thought of Marek's cello leaking through the ceiling, of shared tea and quiet jokes, and no questions about Vienna. Not exactly, I said. Not yet. But there is space for someone else. Someone who doesn't come with an entire orchestra of ghosts. Someone I don't have to save from himself first. He nodded once, slowly. That's fair, he said. It's not about fair, I said. It's about trajectory. Yours is still curving away from something. Mine is finally curving toward myself. They don't intersect right now. Maybe they never will again. He reached into his bag and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. I was going to leave this here if I couldn't find you, he said. He unwrapped it. The full score of the new cycle lay inside, bound neatly. On the first page, under the title doorways there was a dedication line. For the ones who walked through. No initials. He held it out to me. I want you to have this copy, he said. You don't owe me anything. Not listening. Not forgiveness. Not even a shelf to put it on. But if there is a version of the future where you ever wonder whether I learned anything from you, I did. This is the only way I know to prove it. I took the score. The paper was heavy, the ink dark and precise. Without breaking eye contact, I crossed to my workbench, opened my notebook, and slid something out. The original 4-bar page. I had made a photocopy weeks ago and taped it inside my wardrobe in Vienna before moving. The real one had traveled with me, folded and unfolded, like a question I had refused to answer. I held it out to him. "Take it back," I said. His fingers trembled when he accepted it. "I thought," he began. "I know what you thought," I said. "That you had given me something. That it was mine. And in a way, it was. It helped me leave. It helped me realize that sometimes the beginning of someone else's piece doesn't have to dictate the form of your own." I touched the cover of the score. "Now, it's fully yours," I said. "Finished. Claimed. Signed. Let this be the version you keep." He looked down at the page, at the tentative bars that had started all of this. When he looked up again, something in his expression had shifted. It hurt. It also looked, for the first time, free. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "Probably," I said. "The world is small. The music world's smaller. You'll conduct somewhere I'm tuning. Or I'll fix a piano in a hall you've just made the strings hate. We'll nod at each other across a rehearsal break. Maybe, one day, we'll even laugh about this. But not yet." He nodded. He stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. "May I?" he began. Then stopped. "Hug you goodbye," I finished. He winced at the word goodbye, but nodded. I considered. Then I stepped forward and wrapped my arms briefly around him. He was warm and solid and shaking. For a moment, my body remembered everything my mind was trying to release. The smell of cologne and dust, the shape of his shoulder under my cheek, the way his breathing shifted when he was about to say my name. He didn't say it. When we pulled apart, his hands lingered just a fraction too long on my arms, then dropped. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For not letting me make you a ghost," he said. "For leaving when you did. For teaching me that some doors close because they have to. Not because someone failed." He stepped back. "When the cycle is published," he said, "I'll send you a copy, if that's all right. As long as you send it to the workshop," I said. "Not my heart." He smiled, broken and real. "Understood," he said. He turned, opened the door, and paused on the threshold. "Until the next hall, Leah," he said softly. "Until the next hall," I replied. Then he was gone. That night, Marek's cello drifted up through the floorboards again. The saraband was slower now, more patient. I sat on my bed, the doorway's score open beside me, and touched. I didn't need to play it. I had already lived it. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote, "He loved me, and I loved him, and we still walked away." Underneath, I added, "This is not a tragedy. This is a correct ending to the wrong story." Outside, Prague hummed. The city still didn't know my name, but I knew it, and for now, that was enough.